A couple of summers ago, my girlfriend and I went camping in a national forest in northern Wisconsin. And let me tell you, after what happened, we're never going back. We're from Chicago, so northern Wisconsin was our go-to spot for getting away. We'd done a bunch of hiking trips up there and in the Upper Peninsula. But this particular area was new to us. We're not hardcore backpackers or anything, but we've been to plenty of national parks and love sneaking away from the city to chill in nature whenever we can get some time off work. Normally, we're all about that solitude, just soaking in the peace and quiet. But this trip made us rethink that whole getting away from people vibe. It turns out having folks around in unfamiliar places isn't such a bad thing. Our plan was to hike 15 miles along the North Country Trail to a backpacker shelter, spend the night, and hike back to the car the next day. The North Country Trail is a national scenic trail, kind of like the Appalachian Trail, but way less crowded. In some parts of northern Wisconsin, it's super remote, with nothing but logging roads for access. We stayed at a friend's place in Wausau the night before, and hit the road early the next morning to get to the trailhead. As we crossed into the national forest, the thick, green forest was absolutely stunning. I drove slowly along the gravel logging roads, just taking it all in as we headed to our parking spot. On the way to the trailhead, we passed a beat-up old pickup truck parked on the side of the road. There were a couple guys standing next to it, looking straight up like hillbillies. Rusted-out truck, Confederate bumper stickers, the whole deal. As we drove by, I gave a friendly wave, just being polite. They didn't wave back, just stared at us with these blank, unfriendly faces. I thought to myself, well, okay, not the warmest welcome. I glanced in the rear-view mirror after we passed, and they were still staring at us. Right before we rounded a bend, I looked back again to the haze of road dust, and they were still watching us. My girlfriend and I made a few jokes about the creepy locals, but we didn't think much of it at the time. Other than those guys, we didn't see a single soul on those remote logging roads. About 15 minutes later, we found the trailhead after winding through the narrow roads. No one else was parked there, which felt like the perfect setup for some much-needed solitude, fresh air, and relaxation. We locked the car, grabbed our packs, and hit the trail. The weather was cool, which was a godsend because it kept the mosquitoes and black flies away. We snapped pictures along the way, totally in awe of the lush forest and the rolling glacial moraines. After a solid 8 hours of hiking, we finally reached the campsite. It had a wooden backpacker shelter and a fire ring. The shelter had plenty of space, but we decided to pitch our tent in a small clearing about 100 feet behind it. We built a fire at the shelter's fire ring, boiled water for our dehydrated trail food, and settled in to eat as the skies slowly darkened. As we ate, we passed around a bottle of wine, marveling at how many stars you could see out here away from the city lights. Once the fire burned down to a small pile of glowing embers, we decided to head to the tent. We crawled inside, flipped through the pictures we'd taken that day, and after lugging heavy packs for 15 miles and sipping some wine, I was ready to crash. Normally, when we camp at state or national parks, I wear earplugs to block out the noise from RVs or other campers, but out here, it was just the sounds of the forest, so I skipped them. I closed my eyes, letting the chirps and rustles lull me to sleep. My girlfriend was feeling a bit uneasy. She always gets a little nervous sleeping away from home, but I didn't think much of it. I'm not sure when we drifted off, but we were jolted awake by a bone-chilling noise. It was pitch black outside, and over hum of the forest insects, I heard a dull thud, like someone was smacking two logs together. My girlfriend was wide awake now, and we just lay there, frozen, listening. The noise came again, and our hearts started pounding. Our old tent had mesh windows, but this new backpacking tent had none, so we couldn't see a thing. At first, we thought maybe an animal had gotten into our food and garbage bag, which we'd left in the shelter. But the sound was too deliberate, not like an animal rummaging through wrappers or gear. It was just the steady, eerie knock in the darkness. We were unarmed, scared out of our minds, and had no idea what to do. I usually carry bear spray, but I'd stupidly left it at home to save weight, despite my girlfriend's protests. The knocking kept going, but we stayed dead still, not wanting to give away our position. For all we knew, whatever was out there had already spotted our tent. After what felt like forever, the knocking stopped, and we were left in silence, just a faint buzz of insects in the background. Then we heard it. Leaves rustling, a branch snapping, and voices. Low, muffled voices in the distance. We couldn't make out what they were saying, but it sounded like a couple of people talking. The voices went on for a bit, but to our relief, they didn't seem to get any closer. Whoever was out there either hadn't seen our tent or decided to leave us alone. We sat in that tent all night, adrenaline pumping, too terrified to move. At first light, we cautiously crawled out. I scanned the area in every direction, but it was just the forest and the shelter. We hurried over the shelter, and that's when my girlfriend let out a scream. Carved into the wooden entrance of the shelter was the word "kill," freshly cut, with deep, jagged axe marks all around it. The ground was littered with fresh wood splinters. We grabbed our food and garbage bag, packed up our gear as fast as we could, and got the hell out of there. We were practically jogging with our heavy packs, making our way back to the car. I kept glancing over my shoulder, scanning the woods to see if anyone was following us. We passed the same glacial hills we'd seen the day before, and as we got close to the trailhead, we were quietly rejoicing that we were almost out. We made it back in record time, but something was wrong. The windshield wiper on my car was sticking straight up, and there was something stuck to it. As we got closer, I saw blood smeared across the windshield and a squirrel carcass impaled on the wiper blade, with hair and blood caked on the wiper and hood. I didn't even bother cleaning it off. We threw our gear in the trunk, jumped in the car, and I sped off, the dead squirrel still flapping on the wiper. As we tore down the gravel logging road, I kept checking the rearview mirror, but all I could see was a cloud of dust behind us. We didn't stop until we hit a gas station in the nearest town. There, I used a wad of newspaper, pulled the squirrel off, and tried to wipe away as much of the dry blood as I could. We filled up on gas and didn't stop driving until we made it to Milwaukee. That was the last time I set foot in the woods of northern Wisconsin. I love camping. Back when I was in college, anytime I came home for breaks, my buddies and I would grab a cooler full of beer, some gear, and head out to mess around in the woods. Problem was, at school, none of my sorority sisters or other friends were into it, so I'd go through serious camping withdrawals. One day, the weather was just too perfect to waste, so I grabbed some gear, borrowed my buddy's car, and drove out to a spot that was secluded but close enough to civilization that I could run for help if I needed to. Camping can creep me out sometimes, but honestly, that's part of fun. It's like why people listen to scary stories. It's kind of thrilled to get spooked. I set up my little camp, got a fire going, and was having a great time. I didn't bring much gear, just the basics, but I was enjoying myself, reading, poking around the area, gathering some firewood. Then I got this weird feeling, like someone was watching me. I froze mid-step, and right then, I heard a twig snap off to my right. My heart skipped a beat, but then I saw a doe bolt from about 100 feet away. I laughed at myself for getting so jumpy and headed back to camp with an armful of wood. Still, I kept freaking myself out, hearing little noises just outside the firelight's glow. I'm used to my imagination running wild like that, so I shrugged it off and kept whittling a stick I'd been messing with. Eventually, I decided to call it a night, crawled into my tent, and snuffed out the lantern. I was sprawled out, sipping cheap beer in the most unladylike way possible and puffing on a cigar. Another reason I love camping. I can just do whatever I want. I passed out pretty quick. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to footsteps. They were light, kind of hesitant, like something was creeping around. I figured it was that deer again, or maybe a raccoon sniffing around for food I might have left out. Still, I stayed on guard, just in case. I lay there, half asleep, listening for about 30 minutes, one eye open, clutching my K-bar knife. Then I heard this weird rubbing noise and the tent fabric pushing a bit like something was pressing against it. I was paralyzed, gripping my knife so tight my knuckles hurt. I wanted to stab through the tent, but part of me was still hoping it was just my frat buddies pulling a prank or something. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the noise stopped. I started to relax a little, thinking daylight was only a couple hours away. But I realized I should have put my boots on, just in case I needed to move fast. I was still on edge, trying to stay alert, when out of nowhere, my friend's car alarm started blaring. I freaked out, bolted out of the tent, and took maybe 2 steps before someone grabbed me from behind, clamping a hand over my mouth. I tried to scream, but their pinky slipped between my teeth. They say adrenaline can make you do crazy things, and in that moment, I just bit down hard. I swear, it felt like their finger just popped off. The guy screamed, yanked his hand back, and I saw the finger hit the ground. He took off running down the hill, and I sprinted in the opposite direction. I must have looked ridiculous running to the nearest house. A little sorority girl in a tank top, boxer shorts, and steel-toe boots, with blood oozing from my lip, not from the finger, but because I chomped my own lip in the chaos. I got to this house, banged on the door, and told the people inside what happened. They called the cops, gave me some real clothes, and the guy at the house made me a whiskey and coke to calm my nerves. When the police showed up, they took me back to the campsite at dawn. What I saw made my stomach drop. Right next to my tent was a red gas can, and I could only imagine what that was for. The finger was gone, which meant that guy must have come back for it. The cops searched the area but never caught the guy. So somewhere out there, there's a man, maybe eating dinner alone, maybe with a wife and kids, missing his right pinky because of me. Back in 2012, after my first kid was born, I'd let myself go a bit and wasn't feeling like my old athletic self. My New Year's resolution was to get back in shape. So I started running 4 days a week with my friend Hannah, who's an awesome runner and always knew how to keep me motivated. We'd hit the trails after work, usually doing 5 to 10 kilometers on this forest trail near our town. It's one of those trails with lights you can turn on during the darker months, giving you about 45 minutes to run the shorter loops or longer for the bigger ones before the lights shut off automatically. We'd been at it for about 2 months when we started noticing the same guy hanging around the parking lot every time we showed up. He was thin, maybe 25 to 30 years old, always wearing sports clothes, but never actually running. He'd just sit there, never making eye contact, always alone. Hannah and I figured he might be homeless, maybe camping nearby or something, since he was there all the time. We got used to seeing him, just sitting quietly by himself, not talking to anyone. We felt a little sorry for him, but there was something off about him that made us hesitate to approach or check if he was okay. We couldn't quite put our finger on it, but something about him just didn't sit right. One evening, Hannah couldn't make it for our run, so I decided to go solo. I pulled into the parking lot, and my car was the only one there. I did some stretches, flipped on the trail lights, and set off on the 5-kilometer loop. I didn't see the quiet guy anywhere, and with it being autumn, the air was getting chilly, almost freezing, so I figured he'd probably stayed away because of the cold. I started my run, settling into a good pace, enjoying the crisp air. But when I got to the top of the first steep hill, I heard heavy breathing behind me. I glanced over my shoulder, and there he was, the quiet guy, running like a man possessed. He wasn't even wearing running shoes, just regular ones, and his arms were moving in this weird, stiff way, like he was made of metal. His hands were pointed at this odd, upward angle, almost like a sprinter but way more extreme, robotic even. For the first time, he looked me dead in the eyes, and I swear it was like staring into the eyes of a predator. My heart froze. I'd never seen him do anything threatening before, but that look was enough to tell me I was in serious danger. I picked up my pace, running faster to put some distance between us, his heavy breathing getting more ragged behind me. I ran like my life depended on it, adrenaline pumping through my veins, giving me this burst of strength. I tore off my necklace and tossed it on the ground, thinking if something happened to me, at least there'd be a trace. I tried to scream, hoping someone might hear, but I was so out of breath I couldn't get a sound out. My mind was racing. Why is he doing this? What does he want? Who is he? My lungs were burning. And then I thought of my 15-month-old daughter, and that pushed me to keep going until I could taste blood in my mouth. He was still behind me, maybe 100 meters back, and I knew if I tripped, ran out of steam, or fumbled my car keys at the parking lot, I was done for. When I hit a sharp turn on the trail, I made a split-second decision and veered off into the dark woods. I didn't go far, just enough to drop flat on my stomach, my hand scrambling for a rock to defend myself if he found me. Then I realized I was wearing bright running clothes with neon reflectors. Talk about feeling like a glowing target in the dark. I heard him reach the turn, but he just kept running down the trail. I let out a shaky breath and started creeping deeper into the woods, moving as quietly as I could. My heart sank when I heard rapid footsteps coming back from the trail. He must have realized I wasn't ahead and doubled back. I froze, holding my breath, praying he wouldn't hear me. I could picture him standing there, listening for any sound. After what felt like forever, I heard him mutter something in a language I didn't recognize, and then he walked off. But I wasn't taking any chances. I didn't dare go back to the parking lot, scared he'd be waiting by my car. Instead, I kept moving through the woods, knowing if I kept going, I'd eventually hit the last part of the longer 10-kilometer trail near the main road. As I was stumbling through the dark, the trail lights suddenly shut off. For a second, the darkness felt like a shield, wrapping me up in safety. But then, just moments later, they flicked back on. My stomach dropped. Either someone else had started a run, which meant help might be nearby, or he was out there searching for me, maybe even setting up to go after another lone runner. I wasn't sticking around to find out. I pushed on through the woods, tripping over roots, my clothes getting soaked from the damp underbrush. I was freezing, scratched up from branches and exhausted, but I kept going. After what felt like an eternity, I could see the 10-kilometer trail ahead and knew I was close to the main road. I started hearing the faint hum of traffic, and relief washed over me. When I finally stumbled onto the road, I must have looked like I'd been through hell, covered in dirt, blood from small cuts on my face and arms, my neon running gear torn and muddy, and my face probably white as a ghost. I started waving and shouting like a maniac at passing cars, until one stopped, a guy in his 40s with 2 kids in the back seat. He spent the next 10 minutes trying to make sense of my sobbing, incoherent story. He offered to drive me back to the parking lot, but I begged him to take me home instead. When I got home, my husband insisted on calling the police and going back to get my car. I told the cops everything, but technically, no crime had been committed, just a guy chasing me with a terrifying look in his eyes. My husband went to retrieve the car, and when he got there, the driver's side window was smashed, my phone was gone, and so was the photo of my daughter I had hanging from the rearview mirror. To this day, I don't know what that guy wanted or why he chased me like that, but that look in his eyes, there's no doubt in my mind he had bad intentions.
A few years back, my girlfriend and I decided to tackle the southern portion of the Appalachian Trail in Virginia. We'd hiked other parts of the trail before, so we were pretty stoked to try this section, which is about 166 miles long and cuts through the George Washington and Jefferson National Forest. It's one of the more remote, less traveled parts of the trail, which was exactly what we were after. No crowds, just us and nature. We packed up our gear and headed to the start of the Virginia Creeper Trail, planning to end our journey in Damascus. By the time we'd get there, we figured we'd be more than ready to crash in our own beds. It was early October, and the leaves were turning all sorts of fiery colors: reds, oranges, yellows. The air was crisp and cool, perfect hiking weather, and the scenery was straight up gorgeous. Most of the trip was smooth sailing, just your typical hike. Long days, sore feet, but loving every minute of it. But the last couple of nights, things got weird. On this part of the trail, you're supposed to camp on the trail itself or at designated shelters, but we weren't keen on running into other people. We also didn't want anyone sneaking up on us in the middle of the night, so we decided to go off script and find our own spot. After a bit of searching, we found a perfect little clearing a short ways off the trail. It felt like our own private slice of the wilderness. We set up camp, cooked some food, talked for a while, and then snuggled up in the tent to sleep. Around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by my girlfriend shaking me. "Get your gun," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Someone's outside walking around the tent." She said she'd woken up to what sounded like someone running a knife or something along the side of the tent, circling us. Now, when I hike, I always carry a 1911 and a Judge revolver. You never know what or who you might run into out in the middle of nowhere. I grabbed the Judge from my pack, and we sat there, dead silent, listening. For a few minutes, all we heard was the breeze rustling through the trees. But then, clear as day, I caught the sound of footsteps in the woods behind our tent. It wasn't an animal. The steps were too heavy, too deliberate, like something bipedal. I grabbed my flashlight, slipped out of the tent as quietly as I could, and told my girlfriend to stay put. The fire had gone out, so it was almost pitch black, with just the faint glow of the October moon lighting the way. I didn't turn on the flashlight right away, not wanting to make myself a glowing target. I waited, listening for more noises. After a few minutes, I heard snaps and cracks like someone moving through the brush. I flicked on the flashlight, flooding the area with light, and I swear I saw someone duck behind a tree. My heart was pounding, but I shouted, "Get out of here! I'm armed!" I kept the light trained on the spot, gun drawn, and started inching toward where I thought I'd seen the figure. Then, from my right, I heard someone or something take off running through the woods. I spun the light that way, but before I could get a clear look, I heard another set of footsteps sprinting away from the original spot. No way was I chasing after them in the dark. I hurried back to the campsite, my nerves shot, and told my girlfriend what happened. I ended up sitting outside the tent, keeping watch in the darkness until the sun started to rise. In the morning, I poked around to see if I could find any signs of who, or what, was out there. Not far from our tent, in some soft, moist dirt, I found a boot print. It definitely wasn't mine, and it wasn't my girlfriend's. That freaked me out big time because it confirmed someone had been creeping around our camp. I didn't tell her about the print. I didn't want to scare her more than she already was. We were deep into the trail at this point, with 2 days left to go. So we packed up and hit the trail hard, moving faster than usual to cover as much ground as possible. We just wanted to feel safer. That evening, we found a new spot to camp near a cliff with a small overhang, so no one could sneak up behind us. All day, I'd had this gut feeling we were being followed. I didn't have any proof, no footsteps, no voices, but the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. We set up camp, cooked some food, and crawled into the tent. I gave my girlfriend the 1911, showed her how to use it just in case, and kept the Judge right by my side. I told her I'd sleep with one eye open if I slept at all. She eventually dozed off, but I stayed awake, listening to every little sound in the woods. I was on high alert, waiting for anything to happen. At some point, exhaustion must have gotten the better of me because I drifted off. I woke up later to the sound of someone rummaging through our stuff outside the tent. I grabbed my gun, shushed my girlfriend to keep quiet, and through the faint glow of the dying fire, I could see a silhouette moving against the tent. Someone was definitely out there. I shouted, "We're armed. Get the hell out of here." The figure froze, then dropped whatever they were holding and bolted. I burst out of the tent, gun ready, heart racing. Our gear was scattered everywhere. They'd been digging through our stuff. I walked to the edge of the woods in the direction they'd fled, toward a creek nearby with a small trail running alongside it. In the distance, I saw a flickering light like a lantern, and then 3 more lights appeared from the other side of the woods. I ran back to the tent and told my girlfriend to grab whatever she could, anything valuable, and that we were leaving right then and there. We packed up our essentials, left the tent and some other stuff behind, and hit the trail in the middle of the night. It was nerve-wracking. I kept hearing voices off in the woods, branches snapping, and I was constantly looking over my shoulder to make sure no one was coming up behind us. We hadn't seen another hiker the entire trip, so it really felt like we were on our own, in serious danger. After what felt like forever, as we rounded a corner just as the sun was starting to come up, I saw someone step out onto the trail behind us. They just stood there watching. It was too dark to make out any features, just a silhouette. I stopped, turned, and shouted, "Who are you? What do you want?" They didn't say a word, just stared for a moment, then turned and walked back into the woods. We picked up the pace, moving as fast as we could, glancing back every few seconds. Thankfully, we didn't see them again, but my gut told me they were still out there, watching for a good while. We finally reached the end of the trail, exhausted, and got to where we'd parked my girlfriend's car. We were beyond relieved to be out of those Virginia woods. In my head, I kept picturing some clan of creepy, cannibalistic hillbillies hunting us down, but honestly, I have no idea who those people were or what they wanted. Maybe they were just messing with us, or maybe it was something worse. All I know is I'm never going back to find out. This story goes back to August 2013, when I was stationed in Southern Oregon as a military policeman, security forces, or MP for short. It was a sweltering hot day, and with thunderstorms rolling in, my buddy Nick, another MP, and I decided to get out of the heat in town and explore some backroads. Southern Oregon's crisscrossed with old logging roads, some still in use, others totally forgotten and overgrown. On our days off, Nick and I would spend hours driving these roads, starting on ones we knew, then branching off to find new ones, winding deep into the mountains until we'd navigate our way back to pavement. It was our thing. On this particular day, with storm clouds building over the mountains, we set off on a road we'd never been down before. We drove for about an hour without seeing or hearing a single sign of anyone else. No cars, no people, just us and the wilderness. As we rounded a bend, we hit a thick fog bank and came out into a wide, flat meadow surrounded by dense aspen groves. The place was eerily still. No birds chirping, hardly any insects buzzing, no squirrels scampering, nothing. It was like the whole place was holding its breath. On the far side of the meadow, right at the edge of the tree line, we spotted a picnic table. But it wasn't your normal park picnic table. This thing was painted bright orange and was way bigger than any table I'd ever seen, like it was built for giants. Nick and I both clocked the weird vibe right away. The silence, the oversized table, it was all off. Nick drove us closer to check it out, but I was already feeling uneasy. I'm not a tall guy, only about 5 feet 5 inches, but this table was ridiculous. The seats were almost chest high, like I'd have to climb up just to sit on them. As I was looking at it, Nick called me over to the truck. His eyes fixed on something in the aspens. At first, I couldn't see what he was staring at, but then I caught a splash of color that didn't belong. A small one-man tent tucked about 50 feet back in the trees. My stomach dropped. There were no campgrounds out here, no main roads for miles. Whoever was camping this far out had to be a little strange at the very least. And if we could see the tent, they could probably see us. We watched the tent for a bit, but there was no movement, no sound. Nick suggested I call out to see if anyone was there. I didn't want to, but I did anyway. "Hey, anyone in there?" he yelled. Nothing. The silence was deafening, and I was on edge. We thought about just driving away and leaving this creepy place behind, but then we started overthinking it. What if someone was hurt in there? What if it was something worse, like a body or a kidnapping? It sounds dramatic now, but in the moment, it felt like a real possibility. After some back and forth, we decided Nick would turn the truck around and keep it running in case we needed to peel out fast. Go check the tent. My heart was pounding as I walked through the tight-packed aspens toward the campsite. When I got there, everything felt wrong. Backpacks were scattered all over the place, like someone had dumped them out in a hurry. There was no fire pit, no collected wood, nothing to show anyone had been living there. The tent itself was stuffed with backpacks and women's clothing, just piled in there. Dread hit me like a wave. I turned to head back and tell Nick what I'd seen, but before I could, I heard him yelling from the truck. I sprinted back through the trees, my senses on overdrive. When I broke out of the aspens, I saw an old beat-up Ford Taurus blocking the road out of the meadow. 2 guys were in the front, and there was a third person slumped against the back window. I didn't wait to figure out who they were or what was going on. I leapt into the passenger seat, and Nick floored it. The driver of the Taurus tried to block us, swerving into our path, but Nick drove around them through the meadow and gunned it back the way we came. I looked back and saw the car trying to turn around on the narrow road, but we were already gone. Nick drove like a madman, and I was gripping the seat, half expecting them to catch up. We hit the highway without seeing them again, and I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I called the state police as soon as we had a signal, and they promised to send a trooper out to check the scene. The next day, I got a call from a trooper who said the campsite was gone. The tent, the backpacks, the women's clothing, all of it. No trace, except for signs that people had been in the area. The weird orange picnic table was still there, though, standing out like a sore thumb in the middle of nowhere. I haven't gone back to that spot, and I don't plan to anytime soon.
A couple of years ago, I was way more into running than I am now, living in a small, rural village in the UK, pretty much in the middle of nowhere. The area is surrounded by ancient woods and dense forests, perfect for getting lost in nature. There was this one spot, about a 15-minute drive from my house, where I'd go for regular runs. It was a huge woodland with thick trees everywhere, and an old wagon track led from a small car park to the middle of the woods, where it just stopped, and these little dirt paths branched off. The car park was usually empty, but there was often this big van parked there. It never worried me much. Vans are common in England, and I figured it belonged to a dog walking company or something. This one day, it was autumn, with a slight chill in the air and an overcast sky. I pulled into the car park, noticed the van as usual, but didn't think twice about it. I started my run up the wagon track, hitting my stride. About 5 minutes in, I reached the spot where the track ended, and the dirt paths split into a crossroad, one leading back to the car park, and 3 others going left, right, and straight. Normally, I'd go right, but for the heck of it, I decided to switch things up and go straight. I was running at a nice pace, getting a little out of breath, when my app pinged to tell me to slow down and walk. The path opened into a small clearing with some cut logs and scattered branches, and I took a moment to look around, soaking in all the green. The dense trees started again about 5 meters ahead. I was headed that way when out of nowhere, I got this intense feeling that someone was watching me. I'm a woman, 5 feet 7 inches, and not much scares me. I love exploring ghost stories, being out in the dark, all that. But for some reason, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I was 99% sure someone was out there staring. I kept walking toward the trees, trying to decide whether to turn back, my eyes adjusting to the dim light as the canopy closed in. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination and pushed forward, stepping over some brambles. My breathing had calmed down, and I was moving quietly, or so I thought. Looking back, I was probably crashing through the undergrowth like a clumsy ox. Still, I was creeped out, debating whether to turn around, when I glanced up and saw a figure slip behind a tree just 2 meters in front of me. I froze mid-step, like some cartoon character, my legs still half lifted, trying to process what I'd just seen. Was it a trick of the light? But then I noticed an arm still sticking out from behind a tree, just slightly, like they hadn't hidden fast enough. I'm usually quick to make fight or flight decisions, but for some dumb reason, I started backing up slowly, like I thought I was some stealth ninja, which, let's be clear, I'm not. Of course, I tripped over the same brambles I just stepped over. As I stumbled, the figure started moving out from behind the tree. I scrambled to my feet like a shot and bolted back into the clearing. I sprinted to the other side, then stupidly stopped to look back, half hoping I'd imagined it. But there he was, a tall, lanky guy in a black hoodie pulled tight over his face, stepping out from the trees and tilting his head at me, just staring. My blood ran cold. I turned and ran like my life depended on it, flying to the forest like I was Bear Grylls, one earbud still in the couch to 5K app cheerfully telling me, "Good job, you're halfway there," while I'm thinking I'm literally running for my damn life. I didn't stop, didn't look back, just kept going until I reached the car park. Back then, I had a beat-up old Ibiza with a busted central locking system, so I had to use a key to unlock the door. Let me tell you, there was no fumbling like in the movies. I had that door open in 2 seconds flat and peeled out there faster than you can blink. I haven't been back to that spot since, and honestly, I never want to. I don't know if that guy was pulling some kind of prank, if he was connected to that van, or if he was guarding some secret stash he was growing out there and just wanted to scare me off. All I know is he creeped me the hell out, and that's enough for me to stay away for good. I'm a 21-year-old guy living in a big city in Germany, and this happened about 5 months ago. I'd moved out on my own 9 months before into a furnished apartment that I quickly made my own. It was a sweet setup. Everything was going great, just normal life stuff, you know? I was settling in, enjoying having my own space, no drama, just chilling. Then one Saturday night, I got woken up by a loud bang. I figure it was probably some drunk neighbor slamming a door or something, since the stairwell in our building echoes like crazy when there's a loud noise. I brushed it off and tried to go back to sleep. But then I heard something else. This time, it was like a woman crying really quietly. I got out of bed, pressed my ear against the wall of my bedroom, and the sound was clear as day. It was coming from the apartment next door, the one right on the other side of my bedroom wall. I stood there, not sure what to do. I mean, we're neighbors, but we don't know each other, and it wasn't like she was screaming or anything. It sounded personal, maybe a private issue. After a few minutes, the crying just stopped and there was no more noise. I decided to go back to bed and check on her the next morning to make sure everything was okay. Looking back, I kind of feel bad that I didn't do more right then, like call the police just to be safe, but it didn't feel urgent at the time. The next morning before breakfast, I went next door to check on whoever lived there. I looked at the nameplate on the door. Nothing. No name, which was weird. I rang the doorbell anyway, but no one answered. I tried again, still nothing. While I was standing there, an old lady in the stairwell noticed me and asked what I wanted. I told her I was trying to talk to the girl living in the apartment on the 4th floor, left side. She gave me this confused look, like I was speaking another language. So I repeated myself, thinking maybe she didn't hear me right. Then she said no one had lived in that apartment for 3 months. I was floored, but thanked her and didn't mention what I'd heard the night before. I didn't want to freak her out. She gave me the landlord's number, and I headed back to my place to eat breakfast, still trying to wrap my head around it. Later that morning, I called the landlord and told him what I'd heard. He laughed it off, acting like I was talking nonsense, but I pushed him to check the apartment anyway, just in case something was up. He was annoyed, grumbling about having to get up in the middle of the day for what he thought was a wild goose chase, but we agreed to meet at noon. As we walked up the stairs to the apartment, my heart started racing. Standing in front of the door, I was practically shaking. The landlord unlocked it, and I rushed inside, checking every room. It was empty, completely empty. I stepped into the room right next to my bedroom, the one separated by just a wall, and I couldn't believe it. No furniture, no people, nothing. I started wondering if I'd been half asleep or hallucinating or something. I'd never hallucinated before, but the landlord's skeptical look wasn't helping, and I felt like an idiot. Still, I wasn't ready to let it go. I poked around the room some more, and when I got to the radiator, I noticed a red stain. My stomach dropped. It looked like blood. I called the landlord over, and he brushed it off, saying it was probably just paint or something. I insisted he call the police to be sure. He made the call, clearly annoyed, but I could tell he was starting to get a little nervous too. When the cops showed up, I told them the whole story. Since I'd mentioned the blood, they brought black lights with them. As soon as they turned them on, we saw it. Several glowing stains smeared on the side of the radiator, plus more splatters scattered around the room. The trail of blood drops led right to the window across the room and stopped there. The police interviewed me again, then told us we could leave so they could investigate further. I went back to my apartment, shaken up, and couldn't stop thinking about that crying woman. Days went by, and the police never followed up, so I called the local department to see if they found anything. The officer told me they came up empty. No fingerprints, no footprints, no items, not even a hair. The bloodstains were only in that one room, and no one had seen anyone suspicious in the building. The door lock was intact, and no one was reported missing in the area. The landlord wasn't a suspect either. All they could confirm was that the blood came from both a male and a female, which made it even creepier. I never heard anything else after that night. No more crying, no more bangs. The whole thing haunted me for a while. I kept asking myself, who was she? Why were there no other traces? How did anyone even get into the apartment without a key, especially with the water and electricity turned off? I still don't have answers, and it's one of those things that just sticks with you, leaving more questions than closure. Back in the summer of 2002, when I was 16, I was a bit of a tomboy, always climbing trees, playing in the dirt, never touching a Barbie in my life. My boyfriend at the time invited me on a camping trip with him and his parents, and I was all in. They had planned a weekend packed with rafting, boating, swimming, the whole outdoor package. It sounded like paradise, and I was stoked. They had this awesome RV, fully furnished with everything we'd need, and I set up a makeshift bed in the living kitchen area out of courtesy, even though my boyfriend's parents didn't care where I slept. We were parked in a designated camping area deep in the woods, and it was so quiet and peaceful, I almost forgot myself. You could hear the river nearby, and the stillness of the night was so calming. I remember thinking I could live out there forever. The next day was probably the most fun I'd ever had. We went kayaking, which was a blast, swam in the river, and my boyfriend's dad cooked us an amazing meal over the fire. I don't think I'd laughed that much in ages. It was one of those perfect days that just flies by. Before I knew it, it was time to hit the sack because we had another big day planned. I was lying awake in the RV, staring at the ceiling, listening to my boyfriend snoring like a freight train. I couldn't help but chuckle quietly. He was so loud, snorting away. I was still buzzing from the day, laughing to myself, when my whole world turned upside down. It started with a tap on the side of the RV. It caught me off guard, but I didn't freak out right away. I figured it was just some random noise. You know, the kind you hear in the woods, like a branch creaking or something settling. I brushed it off and tried to close my eyes. Then I heard another tap, followed by an unmistakable giggle. My first thought was maybe my boyfriend's parents were up, having some late night adult time or something. I was silently begging to fall asleep before I heard anything else. But then everything went dead quiet. You know that ringing in your ears you get when it's completely silent? That, mixed with the faint sound of the river, hit me, and I got this sinking feeling in my gut, like something bad was about to happen. Then I heard the giggle again, followed by a scraping sound right outside the RV. My heart jumped into my throat, and I felt tears welling up. When I get nervous or scared, I cry, which sucks. Someone was definitely out there. I was frozen, couldn't move a muscle as the scraping kept going. I whispered for my boyfriend, but he just kept snoring away. I was lying about 5 feet from the main door. There was another emergency door at the back of the RV, and I kept my eyes glued to the little square window in the main door, praying no one would come through. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might have a heart attack. I tapped my chest, trying to calm myself down, when I saw it, a small, delicate-looking hand appear in the window, like it was reaching out of the darkness. It was definitely a girl's hand, with those fake press-on nails you'd see at any Walmart. But that didn't stop me from nearly losing it. I sat up and started screaming, full-on wailing. My boyfriend's parents stumbled into the room, bleary-eyed, as I pointed at the door, still freaking out. His dad went to open it, but before he could, there was a loud crash. He fell back, collapsing onto the couch, out cold. Rocks were scattered on the floor, like someone had thrown them through the window. My boyfriend finally woke up, shouting, while his mom went nuts trying to help her husband. I was still screaming, in total shock. When I finally stopped, I heard this hysterical laughter from outside, followed by heavy footsteps on the roof of the RV. Then a high-pitched, nasally voice called out, "They're on the roof," in this teasing, mocking tone. The RV started rocking, like someone was jumping up and down on it. And then there was another crash as someone slammed against the doorframe. The girl outside was shrieking and laughing, mimicking my screams. None of us had cell phones back then, so we were stuck. My boyfriend's dad came to, grabbed a gun from one of the cabinets, flung open the door, and charged out into the darkness. The prancing on the roof stopped instantly, and the girl's shrieking cut off like someone flipped a switch. Everything went silent. I glanced at my boyfriend, and behind him, through the window, I saw a face, a man with a hood pulled over his head, but I could make out the outline of a beard. He raised a gloved hand and waved at me, slow and deliberate. I yanked my boyfriend away from the window and started screaming again. His dad rushed back inside, asking what was wrong. I pointed at the window, but when I looked, the man was gone. We piled into the RV and drove out of that campsite that night. One window smashed from the rocks. My boyfriend's dad went to the hospital with a minor concussion from where he'd been hit. The next morning, his parents called the police, who searched the area but found nothing. No traces, no other reports. I had to go to counseling and therapy for about 2 years after that because I couldn't sleep without nightmares. The stress was so bad that my boyfriend and I ended up breaking up. Eventually, I started getting better. But then, while I was in university, some friends and I went to see a new movie called The Strangers. It was so eerily similar to what I'd been through that I had a panic attack right in the theater and had to go to the hospital. A few months later, I read a newspaper article about a woman who'd been arrested at a campsite not far from where we'd been that summer. She'd been caught vandalizing tents and RVs. There was no picture, so I don't know if it was the same girl, but it made me wonder. As of 2012, I was out of therapy and the nightmares had stopped, but I've got a few guns of my own now. If you knock on my door in the middle of the night, you better have a damn good reason, and you better stay the hell off my roof. The quiet hit me first like a wall, and it just felt too loud. I was standing on the Appalachian Trail, miles of wild forest all around me. Just moments before, I'd been taking a water break, enjoying the tall trees and the occasional bird chirping. But then, as I started walking again, the woods just shut up. Not a normal quiet, you know? It was a kind of silence that grabs you, settles deep in your bones, and makes you second-guess every single step. At first, I didn't even notice the missing noise. When you hike alone, it's usually super peaceful anyway. The scuff of my boots on the dirt, the steady rhythm of my breathing. It's almost like a meditation. But then, the forest just changed. The birds stopped singing, the leaves stopped rustling, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Nothing but the steady thump-thump of my own feet echoing in this empty space. It felt all wrong. There's always something alive in the woods, right? An animal moving, a bug buzzing, just a faint hum of nature. But not here, not now. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart hammering against my ribs. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe this kind of quiet was totally normal. Just a weird moment on the trail. I looked all around me, scanning the endless green canopy and the shadowed tree trunks, looking for anything at all, to explain this creepy stillness. Nothing moved. I shook my head, trying to push the bad feeling away. "Relax, Emma," I whispered to myself, pulling my pack straps tighter. "You've done this before. It's just nature. Enjoy it." But as I kept walking, my eyes darted back and forth between the trees, like I was expecting something to just jump out at me. That silence felt like it was glued to my back, a shadow just creeping along behind my shoulder. Every now and then, I swore I heard something, a distant crunch of leaves or a tiny snap of a twig. But each time I stopped to listen, the sound was gone, just swallowed up by that heavy quiet. After about an hour of this, I saw something odd up ahead. The trees thinned out a bit, and nestled in among the thick branches was a cabin. Or what used to be a cabin, anyway. It looked totally abandoned, forgotten by time. The wooden walls were all weathered and worn. The roof was caving in at weird angles, and ivy and moss were slowly taking over. I definitely hadn't seen it marked on any map. My curiosity started fighting with this growing sense of dread that had been nagging at me since the quiet started. But hey, I know my way around the woods, and sometimes curiosity just wins out. I walked up carefully, the tightness in my chest getting worse as I got closer. The ground around the cabin was a mess of old clothes, shirts, pants, even just one hiking boot, all just thrown around in the dirt like someone had ripped them off in a hurry. I knelt down, picking up a torn flannel shirt. It was damp and cold, like it had been sitting out here for days, maybe even longer. Who just leaves clothes like this, and why? A chill went through me that had nothing to do with the cool air. I dropped the shirt and stood up, my eyes sweeping around me without even thinking. That silence, that suffocating, unnatural silence, pressed in from all sides. My heart sped up, my gut screaming at me to just get out of there. I turned back to the trail, planning to put as much distance as I possibly could between me and that cabin. But as I turned, I saw something that made my blood run ice cold. Footprints. They weren't mine. They were fresh, dug deep into the dirt, and they were coming from behind me, from the way I just walked. A slow, chilling realization crept over me. Someone had been following me. I scanned the trees, every shadow now a potential hiding spot. My breathing felt incredibly loud in my own ears, and I swallowed down the rising panic. I just had to stay calm. Whoever they weren't right on my heels. I still had time. I forced my feet to move, speeding up my pace, my eyes darting to the sides of the trail, looking for any sign of movement. Every time a branch moved or a leaf fell, my heart jumped. I told myself it was just paranoia, that the woods were messing with my head. But then I saw them again, more footprints. They were closer now, even fresher. They had absolutely been following me, step for step. I sped up, almost breaking into a full run, but something told me not to. Running would just make me look scared, make me seem easy prey. I needed to stay in control. Another mile or two passed, and the air got heavier with every step. The trail ahead curved sharply, disappearing into an even thicker part of the forest. I paused, leaning against a tree, tried to catch my breath and clear my head. Then I heard it, a faint, deliberate sound, a crunch of leaves. It wasn't behind me anymore. It was ahead. Someone or something was waiting for me around that bend. I backed away slowly, adrenaline pumping through my veins. There was no way to go forward without walking straight into whatever was there. I turned, scanning the trees behind me. There had to be another way out of here. That's when I saw it. Movement just to my left, right at the edge of the trail. A shadow slipping silently between the trees. Too fast for me to really see it. My stomach dropped. Whoever it was, they weren't far. They were watching, waiting, stalking me like I was their next meal. I swallowed hard, panic climbing up my throat. This wasn't just a normal hike anymore. This was about survival. I took a step back, my boots sinking into the soft ground. My mind raced through all my options, but none of them looked good. If I went back, I'd be heading right toward whatever had been following me. If I went forward, I'd be walking into an ambush. And then I heard again, the crunch of leaves, closer this time. I whipped my head around, and for just a split second, I caught a glimpse of something or someone in between the trees. A figure, partly hidden by the bushes. I couldn't make out any real details, but the way they stood, the way they moved, it was intentional, calculated. I couldn't wait any longer. I took off running down the trail, my heart pounding in my chest. My boots slammed against the dirt as I pushed myself forward, dodging low branches and uneven roots. The heavy silence was gone, replaced by the sound of my own desperate breathing and the hammering of my feet. But I wasn't alone. I could hear them behind me now, hurried and relentless footsteps, chasing me down the trail. I didn't dare look back, terrified of what I might see. My only goal was to get away, to put as much space as possible between me and them. The trail got narrower, the trees closing in on both sides. My lungs burned and my legs screamed for a break, but I couldn't stop. I just wouldn't. Then, suddenly, the trail opened up into a small clearing. I stumbled into it, gasping for air, my body shaking with exhaustion and fear. But the clearing wasn't empty. In the middle, a fire pit was still smoldering, the embers faintly glowing. Scattered around it, just thrown haphazardly, were more clothes, jackets, shoes, backpacks, just like the ones I'd seen near the cabin. And right past the fire pit, leaning against a tree, was a figure. They were watching me. I froze. The person, if you could even call them that, was gone. Their clothes all torn and dirty. Their face was super pale, almost glowing in the dim light, with sunken cheeks and eyes that seemed to just suck in all the light instead of reflecting it. They didn't move, didn't say a word. They just stared. My mouth went bone dry. I had no idea what to do. I was trapped. There was nowhere to run. And then, slowly, the figure raised a hand, pointing back toward the trail. I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and ran, sprinting down the trail, away from the clearing, away from the cabin, away from the absolute horror that had been silently stalking me. I didn't stop, didn't look back until the sound of the footsteps behind me just vanished into nothing. When I finally made it to a ranger station hours later, I was shaking, out of breath. I tried to explain what had happened, but my words just came out in broken pieces. And even then, the rangers didn't really believe me. But I knew what I had seen, what had followed me. And I knew one thing for sure. The silence in those woods wasn't natural, and it wasn't done with me. Honestly, I never thought a simple walk could just flip my whole world upside down. But that's exactly what happened when my sister, Emily, literally disappeared off the face of the earth on a crisp autumn morning. That day started like any other, totally normal. I woke up to the smell of coffee brewing, and Emily's happy humming floating up from the kitchen. It was our Sunday thing. She'd go for an early morning hike on the trail right behind our house, and I'd have breakfast all ready when she came back, rosy-cheeked and full of energy from her walk. "I'm heading out, Liam," Emily shouted up the stairs. "Don't forget to start the pancakes in about an hour." "Got it," I mumbled, still half asleep. "Be careful out there." I heard the back door click shut and just rolled over, pulling the covers up higher. If I had known those were going to be the last words I ever said to my sister, I would have done things so differently. I would have given her a huge hug goodbye, told her I loved her, maybe even insisted on go with her. But you know how hindsight is, a total jerk. And I had no clue about the nightmare that was just about to unfold. An hour later, I finally dragged myself out of bed and started making breakfast. The pancakes were ready. The coffee was poured, but still no sign of Emily. I checked my watch. She was usually back by now, but I figured she just got a little sidetracked, enjoying all the beautiful fall colors. Another hour went by. The pancakes were cold, and this gnawing worry started in my stomach. I tried calling her cell phone, but it just went straight to voicemail. That was so not like Emily. She always kept her phone charged and on her just in case. By early afternoon, I just couldn't shake the feeling that something was really, truly wrong. I called the local police, but they told me to chill out and wait 24 hours before filing a missing person report. Frustrated and honestly pretty scared, I decided to go retrace Emily's steps myself. The trail behind our house winds through the super dense forest, a crazy beautiful mix of red and gold leaves making this thick canopy overhead. Usually I find it gorgeous and totally peaceful, but that day, every shadow looked menacing. Every little rustle of leaves felt like it could be a clue or a threat. "Emily," I shouted, my voice echoing to the trees. "Emily, are you out here?" Only the chirping of birds and the whisper of the wind answered me. I walked for hours, sticking to the main trail, but also checking every little offshoot and deer path I could find. As the sun started to set, casting these long, creepy shadows through the trees, I finally realized I needed serious help. The next morning, a search party came together. Friends, neighbors, and local volunteers all fanned out through the forest, yelling Emily's name and looking for any sign of her. Police dogs sniffed her jacket, then led their handlers down the trail, only to abruptly lose the scent about 2 miles in. Days just rolled into weeks. The police checked every single lead, interviewed everyone who might have seen Emily that morning. Flyers with her picture went up all over town and in all the neighboring cities. Her story hit the local news, then even national headlines, as the whole mystery just got deeper and deeper. And then we thought we had a breakthrough. A hiker found Emily's phone miles from where she should have been. The police were all over it, treating it as a huge clue, really hoping it would lead them to her. I remember the exact moment they showed it to me, sealed in an evidence bag. The screen was cracked, but it still lit up when they pressed the power button. That's when we saw it. A final text message, sent hours after Emily should have been home. My hands shook so bad as I read the words out loud. "I'm sorry. I can't explain. Don't look for me." That message just created more questions than it answered. It didn't sound anything like Emily. Was she in trouble? Did someone force her to send it? Or did something happen that made her actually want to disappear? The investigation took a whole new turn. They dug through Emily's entire life, looking for any possible reason she might have run away. But everything they found just confirmed what I already knew. Emily was happy, successful, with absolutely no apparent reason to just voluntarily vanish. As weeks turned into months, the searches became less frequent. The news coverage started to dry up. People stopped asking me about her as often, their sympathetic looks slowly turning into pity. But I just couldn't let it go. Every single time I walked that trail, I felt like I was missing something, like the forest itself was hiding the truth from me. 1 year after Emily's disappearance, I decided to do the hike again, tracing the exact steps I imagined she'd taken that fateful day. The forest was even quieter now, all the excitement of the search long gone. Every leaf crunching under my feet, every bird call, just seemed to emphasize the massive emptiness Emily had left behind. I honestly don't know what made me wander off the main path that day. Maybe it was just instinct, or maybe I was just so sick of following the same route that had given us zero answers. I pushed through the super thick patch of underbrush, branches scratching at my arm, until I stumbled into a small clearing I'd never, ever seen before. That's when I saw it. A single footprint in a patch of mud, partly hidden by fallen leaves. My heart raced as I knelt down to really examine it. The size and shape matched Emily's hiking boots perfectly. But how the hell had the searchers missed this? And why was there only one print? I scanned the clearing, looking for any other signs. At first, I saw nothing. But as I turned to leave, something else caught my eye. carved into the trunk of an old oak tree, almost impossible to see unless you were really looking for it, was a series of numbers and letters. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture. Was this a message from Emily? A clue left by whoever had taken her? Or just some random coincidence, totally unrelated to her vanishing? As I made my way back to the trail, my mind was racing with every possibility. The forest around me, which used to feel so familiar, now seemed full of secrets. Every tree could be hiding a clue, every shadow concealing the truth about what happened to Emily. I reported my findings to the police, but they were skeptical. Too much time had passed, they said. The footprint could belong to anyone, and the carving was probably just nothing. But deep down in my gut, I knew I had stumbled onto something important. In the days that followed, I became totally obsessed with those numbers and letters carved into the tree. I tried every single code and cipher I could think of, spent countless hours researching online, looking for any pattern or meaning. But the more I stared at them, the less sense they made. My friends and family started to really worry about me. They said I was getting too fixated, that I needed to start moving on with my life. But how could I move on when every unanswered question felt like I was betraying Emily? 3 weeks after my discovery in that clearing, I got an anonymous email. The sender's address was just a bunch of random characters, and the message contained only 2 words: keep looking. I tried to trace the email, but it led nowhere. I reported it to the police, but they just said there wasn't enough to go on. To them, it was probably just a cruel prank. To me, it was hope, tiny and fragile, but hope nonetheless. Now, as I sit here writing all this out, I can see the forest through my window. The same trees Emily and I climbed as kids. The same paths we explored together. Somewhere in those woods, I am absolutely convinced, lies the answer to her disappearance. Tomorrow, I'm going back to that clearing. I'll search every single inch of it again, and then I'll move on to the next section of forest. I'll keep looking until I find Emily, or until I uncover the truth about what happened to her. Because out there, among those whispering leaves and shadowy trails, the forest is holding its secret, and I will not rest until I unravel it, no matter how long it takes or where it leads me. Emily's out there somewhere, and I'm going to find her. The sound of my own heart beating was just deafening in the dead quiet of the night. I was lying there, absolutely frozen in my sleeping bag, as it slowly sank in. Someone, or maybe something, had been walking in circles around my tent while I was asleep. My name is Sarah, and I never, ever thought a simple camping trip would turn into the most terrifying night of my entire life. It was supposed to be a super peaceful weekend getaway. I'd been busting my butt at work for months, and I seriously needed to get back to nature and just clear my head. Willow Creek Campground, tucked deep into the Cascade Mountains, seemed like the perfect spot. Remote, quiet, and way far from all the city craziness. I got there late Friday afternoon. The sun was already starting to disappear behind the huge pine trees. The campground was practically empty, just a few RVs scattered around the big area. Perfect, I thought. The fewer people, the better. I found this really private spot near the edge of the campground, with dense forest on 3 sides. As I was setting up my tent, I breathed in that crisp mountain air, and I could actually feel the tension in my shoulders just melt away. This was exactly what I needed. The evening was calm and nice. I built a small fire, roasted some marshmallows, and just got lost in a good book. The only sounds were the gentle crackle of the fire and the soft hoot of an owl far off. By the time I crawled into my sleeping bag, I felt more relaxed than I had in months. I drifted off to sleep easily, just lulled by the quiet rustling of leaves and the light breeze. But sometime in the middle of the night, something jolted me awake. At first, I couldn't figure out what disturbed me. The forest was eerily silent, not even the chirping of crickets to break the quiet. Then I heard it, a soft crunch of leaves right outside my tent. My breath caught in my throat. As I strained my ears, try to tell myself it was just a deer or some other harmless little forest creature. But the footsteps were too deliberate, too measured. Whatever was out, there was walking on two legs. I lay perfectly still, barely daring to breathe. The footsteps kept going, slowly circling my tent. Once, twice, 3 times. With each pass, they seemed to pause just a little bit longer near the entrance. My mind raced with all these possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. A bear? An axe murderer? Some crazy hermit living in these woods? After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps finally moved away, fading into the distance. I waited several more minutes, my heart pounding so loud I was sure it could be heard for miles. Finally, when I just couldn't stand it anymore, I fumbled for my phone. The harsh light of the screen blinded me for a second, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw it was just past 3 a.m. With trembling fingers, I turned on the flashlight app and unzipped the tent flap just enough to peek out. The campsite was lit up by the silvery moonlight, casting long shadows everywhere. At first glance, everything looked normal, but as I swept the light beam around, my blood ran cold. There, in the soft earth right around my tent, was a perfect circle of footprints. They were definitely human, the clear imprint of a boot sole, much bigger than my own feet. Whoever had made them had walked methodically around my tent, their steps perfectly spaced and purposeful. The prints led off into the forest, disappearing into the shadows between the trees. I zipped the tent closed with shaking hands, my mind just spinning. What was I supposed to do? Stay put and hope whoever was didn't come back? Make a break for my car? Try to call for help? Even though I knew my cell service was pretty terrible out here, as I was trying to decide, a twig snapped in the forest, unnaturally loud in the silence. My head snapped toward the sound, and I caught a quick glimpse of movement right at the edge of the tree lean. Was it just a shadow, or had I actually seen a figure duck behind a tree? I held my breath, straining my eyes to see through the darkness. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, super slowly, a shape appeared from behind a massive pine tree. In the dim moonlight, I could make out the silhouette of a person, standing absolutely still, facing my tent. Panic just clawed at my throat. I wanted to scream, to run, to do something, but fear had me completely frozen. The figure stayed perfectly still, barely more than a shadow among the trees. Were they watching me? Could they somehow see me through the tent walls? Suddenly, my survival instincts just screamed at me. I had to get out of here. Moving as quietly as I possibly could, I slipped on my shoes and grabbed my car keys. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely open the tent zipper, but I managed to open it just enough to squeeze through. The cool night air hit me like a slap in the face as I popped out. I risked one more quick look toward the tree lean, but the figure was gone. Had I just imagined it? No. The footprints were still right there, a chilling reminder that this was all too real. I made a mad dash for my car, not daring to look back. Just as I reached for the door handle, a blood-curdling scream ripped through the night. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, not quite human, not quite animal. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, just echoing through the trees. I fumbled with my keys, dropping them in my panic. As I bent down to pick them up, movement caught my eye. There, reflected in the car's side mirror, was a dark shape emerging from the forest behind me. My fingers closed around the keys just as I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching rapidly. I yanked the car door open and threw myself inside, slamming it shut and jamming the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, headlights cutting to the darkness, and there, lit up in the beams, was a figure standing directly in front of my car. It was a man, or at least something that looked like a man. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in ragged clothing that might have once been a park ranger's uniform. But it was his face that made my blood run cold. It was unnaturally pale, almost glowing in the headlights, with sunken cheeks and eyes that seemed to just absorb the light instead of reflecting it. For a split second, our eyes met. A smile spread across his face, showing teeth that were way too sharp to be human. Then, faster than I thought possible, he darted to the side and disappeared into the shadows. I slammed the car into reverse, tires spinning on the gravel as I backed out of the campsite. I didn't stop to grab my stuff or even close the tent. All I could think about was putting as much distance as possible between me and this place. As I sped down the winding forest road, my mind was racing. Who was that man? What did he want? And most disturbingly, how had he moved so unbelievably fast? I drove for hours, not stopping until the first rays of sunlight started to peek over the horizon. Only then, as I pulled into a bustling truck stop, did I finally feel safe enough to actually breathe. My hands were still shaking as I called the police to report what had happened. They took my statement, but I could tell from their tone that they didn't quite believe me. They promised to send someone to check out the campground, but warned me that without any real evidence, there wasn't much they could do. I never went back to get my abandoned camping gear. Whatever that thing in the woods was, it could keep my tent and sleeping bag as a souvenir. No amount of money could ever convince me to set foot in those woods again. To this day, I can't shake the memory of those footprints circling my tent or the image of that pale face in my headlights. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I swear I can still hear that inhuman scream echoing in the distance. I used to love camping, how peaceful and alone you felt in nature. But now I know that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't just in our imagination. They're the ones waiting just beyond the firelight, watching and circling until they decide it's time to make their move. I'll never forget the sound that just shattered our peaceful night on the farm. A scream, bone-chilling, that cut through the darkness like a knife. It was the kind of sound that turns your blood to ice, the kind that tells you something is terribly, completely wrong. Little did I know, that scream would be the last time I'd ever hear my father's voice. My name's Sarah, and I grew up on a small farm in rural Nebraska. It was just me, my mom, and my dad, John. We weren't rich, not by a long shot, but we had each other in the land, and that was enough. At least, it was until that fateful night when everything changed. It was a Tuesday in late October. The harvest was all done, and there was a real chill in the air that hinted winter was coming. I was up super late, studying for a biology test, when I heard it, that awful scream, followed by a loud crash from the direction of our barn. I shot upright in my chair, my heart pounding. "Dad!" I called out, but there was no answer. I ran to my parents' room, finding my mom already awake and looking super worried. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling. I just nodded, couldn't even speak. We both knew Dad sometimes went out to check on the animals at night, if he heard something strange. Without a word, we grabbed flashlights and hurried outside. The night was pitch black, the kind of darkness that just seems to swallow up the beam of a flashlight. As we got closer to the barn, I could hear the animals inside. They were restless, making more noise than usual. "John!" Mom called out, her voice echoing in the still night air. "Honey, are you okay?" Silence. Just the sound of our own ragged breathing and the nervous shuffling of the animals in the barn. We reached the barn door and found it slightly ajar. Mom pushed it open, the hinges groaning eerily. The smell hit us first. The familiar scent of hay and animals, but then there was something else. Something metallic that made my stomach churn. Our flashlight beams danced across the inside of the barn. Everything looked normal at first glance. The cows in their stalls, the hay bales stacked neatly against the wall. But then I saw it. Dad's toolbox, completely flipped over on the floor, wrenches and screwdrivers scattered everywhere. "John!" Mom's voice was totally panicked now. We split up, searching every corner of the barn, calling out for Dad. But he wasn't there. He wasn't anywhere. The next few hours were a total blur. We called the police, and pretty soon our quiet farm was swarming with deputies and search dogs. They combed every single inch of our property, but found nothing. No signs of a struggle, no blood, no dad. It was like he had just vanished into thin air. The days that followed were the hardest of my life. Mom and I barely slept, jumping at every sound, hoping against hope that it was Dad coming home. The police asked endless questions. Did John have any enemies? Any reason to run away? Was he involved in anything illegal? The answers were always the same. No, no, and no. Dad was a good man, a simple farmer who loved his family and his land. A week after Dad's disappearance, we got our first real clue, if you could even call it that. One of our neighbors found Dad's boot in the middle of our cornfield, about a quarter mile from the barn. Just one boot, sitting there as if someone had placed it on purpose. The discovery started a new wave of searches. Volunteers from town came out in droves, forming long lines to go through the cornfield. But again, nothing. No second boot, no clothes, no Dad. As weeks turned into months, life just took on this surreal quality. Mom and I went through the motions of running the farm, but our hearts just weren't in it. Every time I walked into the barn, I half expected to see Dad there, tinker with a tractor or feeding the cows. But he was never there, and the silence without him was just deafening. The police eventually ran out of leads. They told us gently that we should prepare ourselves for the possibility that we might never know what happened to Dad. But how do you prepare for something like that? How do you move on when there's no closure, no answers? I just threw myself into my studies, spending more and more time at the library in town. It was easier there, surrounded by books and strangers who didn't look at me with pity in their eyes. One day, about 6 months after Dad disappeared, I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. "Did you hear about the Miller's place?" An older man was saying to the librarian. Their barn door was wide open this morning, tools all over the place, but nothing stolen as far as they can tell. I froze, my mind racing. It sounded so similar to what had happened at our farm. Could it be connected? I wanted to ask the man for more details, but fear held me back. What if I was just making things up? That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying that night over and over again. There had to be something we missed, some clue we overlooked. As the first light of dawn crept through my window, I made a decision. I was going to solve this mystery, no matter what it took. The next day, I started my own investigation. I made a map of our property and the surrounding area, marking where Dad's boot had been found. I interviewed our neighbors again, asking if they'd seen or heard anything unusual in the months before Dad disappeared. Most of them had nothing new to add, but Mrs. Jenkins, our closest neighbor to the east, mentioned something that caught my attention. She said that a few weeks before Dad vanished, she'd seen a strange car parked at the end of our driveway late one night. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now I added it to my notes, trying to piece together a timeline. What if someone had been watching our farm, planning something? But what and why? As I dug deeper, I started noticing other weird little details. Small things that didn't seem important at the time, but now really stood out. Like the fact that our dog, Max, hadn't barked that night. He always barked at strangers, but on the night Dad disappeared, he'd been completely silent. And then there were the hang-up calls we'd been getting in the weeks before. Mom had brushed them off as telemarketers. But what if they were something much more sinister? The more I uncovered, the more questions I had. But I was determined to find answers. I started spending my evenings in the barn, trying to retrace Dad's likely steps that night. I examined every inch of the place, looking for anything out of the ordinary. It was on one of these nights, almost a year after Dad's disappearance, that I found it. I was moving some old crates in the corner when I noticed a loose board in the wall. Curious, I pried it open, and something fell out, a small leather-bound notebook. With shaking hands, I opened it. Inside, in Dad's familiar handwriting, were dates, names, and numbers. Most of it meant nothing to me, but one name just jumped out, Robert Carlyle. I recognized it as the name of a man Dad had argued with at the farmer's market a few months before he vanished. Suddenly, I felt like I was on the verge of something big. What was in this notebook? Why had Dad hidden it? And what did Robert Carlyle have to do with any of this? I wanted to run to Mom to show her what I found, but something stopped me. A voice in my head warned me to be super careful, to keep this to myself until I understood more. As I sat there in the silent barn, clutching Dad's secret notebook, I felt a mix of excitement and fear. I was closer than ever to figuring out the mystery of his disappearance, but I also felt like I was stepping into something really dangerous. The barn creaked around me, and for a moment, I could almost hear Dad's voice, warning me to be careful, but I'd come too far to turn back now. Whatever secrets this notebook held, whatever truth lay behind Dad's disappearance, I was going to find out. I tucked the notebook into my jacket and stood up, taking one last look around the barn. Somewhere out there, the truth was waiting, and I was going to find it no matter where it led me or what it cost me, because Dad was out there somewhere, and I wasn't going to rest until I brought him home. It's actually funny how fast a chill, peaceful hike can turn into something else entirely. 1 minute you're just soaking in all the nature sounds, the birds chirping, the wind rustling the trees. The next, the whole world just goes dead silent, like someone hit a mute button on everything around you. That's exactly what happened to me that day, right when I thought I was finally starting to de-stress from all the chaos in my life. I'd been hiking alone for a few days, just me and my backpack, trying to clear my head. The Appalachian Trail has always been my go-to when I needed to get away, and this time was no different. The woods just have a way of resetting my brain, making my problems feel so much smaller. But as I got into a more remote part of the trail, way out of the way from all the usual weekend crowds, things started to feel off. It wasn't anything I could really point to at first. Just this subtle shift in the air, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I just shrugged it off. Figured it was just me getting too deep in my own head. But then I saw it, a backpack, just lie on the ground, halfway off the trail. Like someone had just tossed it there in a hurry. It made no sense. You don't just leave your gear like that out here. Not unless something's seriously wrong. I hesitated, just standing there staring at it for a moment too long. My gut was screaming at me to just keep walking, to not get involved. But curiosity, or maybe some sense of duty, just got the better of me. I stepped off the trail and crouched down next to the backpack. It looked pretty beat up, dirt stained, with the zipper half open and some clothes poking out. I reached for it, thinking maybe I could find some ID, or even a note that would explain why it was just abandoned there. But as soon as my fingers touched it, I got this really weird feeling, like I was intruding on something I definitely shouldn't be. Still, I unzipped the main pocket. Inside were all the usual things. A water bottle, a few protein bars, a map folded messily in the side compartment. But what really caught my eye was a small notebook tucked at the bottom. It was small, weathered, with frayed edges, like it'd seen better days for sure. I pulled it out and flipped through the pages. It wasn't exactly a journal, more like someone's thoughts scribbled down super fast. The handwriting was all over the place, some pages neat, others shaky, like the person had been in a huge hurry or totally panicked. Most of it didn't make much sense, just random notes about the trail, mentions of someone named Chris. But then near the end, I found something that made my skin absolutely crawl. In big, bold letters, practically gouged into the paper like the person had pressed down way too hard, was a single word: help. And right underneath it, a really rough drawing of an arrow pointing deeper into the woods. I stood up, my heart thudding in my chest. Someone was clearly in big trouble, but there was no sign of them now, just their abandoned backpack and that desperate plea scribbled in a notebook. I glanced around, suddenly feeling like I wasn't alone anymore. The trees felt like they were pressing in on me, their shadows longer than they had any right to be this early in the afternoon. I should have turned back. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to just leave it alone, to pretend I hadn't seen anything. But instead, I started following the direction the arrow pointed. The path wasn't clear, barely even a hint through all the undergrowth. The further I went, the more overgrown it got, until it wasn't even a path anymore, just a line of broken branches and flattened grass. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Another sign, maybe, or some clue that would explain the backpack and the cry for help. But all I found was more silence. Then, maybe half a mile in, I stumbled across something else. A small clearing with a fire pit in the center, long since cold. And right next to it, a pair of boots, just sitting there like someone had taken them off and walked away barefoot. Except there were no tracks, no sign of anyone leaving the clearing at all. I stared at those boots for a long moment, the hairs on the back of my neck standing straight up. There was something seriously wrong with this place, something I couldn't explain, but I could feel it deep in my gut. I stepped closer, my eyes scanning the ground for any hint of what might have happened here. That's when I noticed the marks. They were faint at first, barely visible unless you were really looking for them. Small, jagged scratches in the dirt around the fire pit, like something heavy had been dragged. I knelt down, running my fingers over the marks. They led away from the clearing, towards a dense thicket of trees just beyond. I stood up, every instinct telling me to just leave, to turn back while I still could. But something just pushed me forward, this terrible curiosity gnawing at my insides. I followed the marks through the trees, my breath coming faster now, the silence around me growing heavier with each step. After maybe 50 yards, the marks just vanished, swallowed by the undergrowth. But by then, I didn't even need them. I could smell it, the awful stench of something rotting. I slowed my pace, my stomach churning. The smell got stronger as I pushed through the last line of trees, and when I came out on the other side, I froze. There, lying in the middle of a small open space, was a body. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth. The figure was face down, half covered in dirt and leaves, their clothes all torn and stained. They weren't moving. I didn't need to even check to know they were dead. But that wasn't what made my blood run ice cold. It was the way they were positioned, arms stretched out, fingers clawing the ground like they'd been trying to crawl away from something. I stood there, frozen for what felt like forever, my mind racing. What the hell happened here? Who was this person? And more importantly, where was whoever or whatever had done this? My thoughts were cut off by a sound, a faint rustling coming from somewhere behind me. I spun around, my heart in my throat, but there was nothing there, just trees, empty, silent trees. I didn't wait to see if something or someone was watching me from the shadows. I turned and ran. My legs felt like they weighed a ton, my chest burning with every breath. I sprinted back through the woods, back to the clear with the boots, back toward the trail, not stopping until I was far, far away from that place. When I finally slowed down, gasping for air, I found myself back at the spot where I'd first found the backpack. It was still there, sitting abandoned at the side of the trail. But something was different now. The notebook was gone. I stared at the empty space where it had been, my mind trying to make sense of it. I hadn't taken it with me, hadn't even touched it after I found the note. So where the hell had it gone? A chill ran down my spine as I scanned the woods around me, half expecting to see someone standing there, watching me from between the trees. But there was nothing, just the same heavy silence that had followed me all day. I didn't care what had happened to the notebook or the person who left it behind. I didn't care about the body or the boots or the marks in the dirt. All I cared about was getting out of there. I grabbed my pack and practically flew down the trail, not stopping until I reached the next shelter, where a few other hikers had set up camp for the night. I didn't tell them what I'd seen. I didn't tell anyone. Even now, weeks later, I still haven't told anyone. I can't explain what happened out there. Maybe it was some horrible accident. Maybe I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or maybe there's someone lurking in those woods, watching, waiting for the next unlucky hiker to wander off the trail. Whatever it was, I won't be going back to find out. Look, I've seen some seriously weird stuff in my years as a detective, but nothing, and I mean nothing, quite like the case of Sarah Jenkins. One minute she's right there, serving tables at the Bluebird Diner, and the next, poof, gone, vanished into thin air, leaving behind only questions and a cold cup of coffee. My name's Jack Reeves, and I've been with the Millbrook Police Department for 20 years. Thought I'd seen it all, you know? But Sarah's disappearance? That shook me to my core. It's the kind of case that keeps you up at night, makes you second-guess everything you ever thought you knew about the world. It was a crazy busy Friday night at the Bluebird when it went down. The diner was packed, smelling thick with fried food and coffee. Sarah was working her usual shift, zipping between tables with that easy smile of hers. I know, because I was there, grabbing my usual end-of-week meal at the counter. I remember watching her walk into the storage room at the back of the diner, notepad in hand. She was probably just going to grab more napkins or straws, but she just never came out. At first, nobody even noticed. The diner was buzzing with chatter, the clink of silverware, the sizzle from the grill. But after about 10 minutes, I saw Marge, the owner, looking around with a frown. "Hey, Jack," she called out to me. "You seen Sarah? She's got orders piling up." I shook my head. This weird feeling started in my gut. Last I saw, she went into the storage room. Marge huffed and marched to the back. I heard her call Sarah's name, then again louder, and then silence. The next thing I knew, Marge was rushing out, her face ghost white. "She's not there," she stammered, her voice shaking. "Sarah's gone." I stood up, my cop instincts kicking right in. "What do you mean, gone?" "I mean, she's not in the storage room. She's not anywhere. It's like she just disappeared." The whole diner went silent as everyone realized what was happening. I quickly took charge, telling everyone to stay calm and stay put while I checked it out. As I made my way to the storage room, I could feel dozens of eyes on my back, all wondering the exact same thing. What the hell was going on? The storage room was tiny, barely big enough for a few shelves of supplies, and a small freezer. There was no other way out, no windows, nowhere Sarah could have gone. Her notepad was on the floor, a pen rolled under a shelf. But Sarah herself? Not a trace. I searched every single inch of that room, looking for any clue, any explanation, but there was nothing. It was like Sarah had literally just stopped existing the second she walked through that door. The next few hours were a total blur of activity. I called in every officer available, and we turned that diner upside down. We interviewed every customer, every employee. We checked the security cameras, which showed Sarah entering the storage room at 8:47 p.m. and nothing else. As the night dragged on, and we still found no trace of Sarah, this uneasy feeling settled over the whole town. People started whispering, coming up with all sorts of wild theories. Some said she must have run away. Others hinted at foul play. But I knew Sarah. She wasn't the type to just up and leave, and there was absolutely no sign of a struggle. The days that followed were filled with fruitless searches and dead-end leads. We combed the woods around town, checked every abandoned building, sent out alerts to neighboring counties. But it was like Sarah had just vanished off the face of the earth. Her family was completely devastated. I'll never forget the look in her mother's eyes when I had to tell her we had no leads. It was this mix of grief, disbelief, and this desperate hope that I'd somehow pull a miracle out of my hat. But I had nothing to give her but empty promises. As weeks turned into months, the case went cold. People stopped talking about it as much. Life in Millbrook slowly got back to normal, but I couldn't let it go. Every night, I'd find myself poring over the case files, looking for something, anything I might have missed. It was about 6 months after Sarah's disappearance when I got the call that changed everything. It was from Marge at the diner, her voice shaking with both excitement and fear. "Jack, you need to get down here now." I was there in 5 minutes flat, my heart pounding. Marge met me at the door, her face pale. "It's Sarah," she said. She called. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "What? When? What did she say?" Marge shook her head, looking completely bewildered. "It was just a few minutes ago." The phone rang, and when I picked up, it was her voice. But Jack, she sounded so scared. All she said was, "Help me," and then the line went dead. I immediately got to work, calling the phone company to trace the call, but it led nowhere. The call had come from a prepaid cell phone, totally impossible to trace. Over the next few days, more calls came in to the diner, to Sarah's parents, even one to the police station. Always Sarah's voice, always barely audible, always sounding terrified, and always cutting off after just a few words. The town was in an uproar. Where was Sarah? Was she being held somewhere? How was she making these calls when her phone was still in her abandoned truck? I threw myself back into the investigation with renewed energy. I re-interviewed everyone, went over every piece of evidence, and slowly, a pattern started to show up. All the calls came at the exact same time, 8:47 p.m., the precise moment Sarah had entered the storage room the night she disappeared. And they all lasted exactly 17 seconds before cutting off. It was during one of my late-night review sessions that I noticed something else. In the background of the calls, barely audible, was a sound I recognized, the hum of the old freezer in the diner storage room. My mind reeled. Could it be possible? Had Sarah somehow been in the storage room this whole time? I raced to the diner, getting there just before closing time. Marge looked at me like I was nuts when I asked to see the storage room again, but she let me in. The room looked exactly the same as it had 6 months ago. I stood there, feeling like an idiot, not sure what I even expected to find. And then I heard it, a faint tapping sound coming from the freezer. With my heart in my throat, I yanked open the freezer door. It was empty, just as I knew it would be, but the tapping kept going, sounding like it was coming from behind the freezer. I called for help, and along with a couple of strong guys from the diner, we managed to move the heavy freezer. And there, hidden behind it, was a door I'd never noticed before, a door that absolutely shouldn't have been there. With shaking hands, I turned the handle. The door swung open, revealing a small, dark space, and there, huddled in a corner, pale and thin, but alive, was Sarah. The next few hours were a blur of ambulances, tears, and pure disbelief. Sarah was rushed to the hospital, suffering from dehydration and malnutrition, but she was alive. How she had survived in that tiny space for 6 months, we still don't know. As for how she got there, why she was there, and who was responsible, those are questions we're still trying to answer. Sarah herself remembers very little, just speaks of a dark figure and a voice telling her to hide. The case is far from closed, but as I sit here in my office, looking at the photo of Sarah reunited with her family, I can't help but feel this huge sense of triumph. Against all odds, we found her. We brought her home. In all my years on the force, I've never seen anything like the case of the vanishing waitress. It's a reminder that sometimes the truth is way stranger than fiction, and that in this job, you can never stop looking, never stop believing. Because sometimes, miracles really do happen. The first thing that grabbed us was the fire, or what was left of it. It wasn't the kind of fire you'd light to warm up or cook. This was a dead fire, just ash, gray and cold, like it had been out for hours. But the weird part, it looked fresh, like someone had just literally packed up and left. We'd been hiking the Appalachian Trail for 3 days straight, and the only signs of life we'd seen were a hike away off in the distance or some wildlife scurrying around. So, when Emily and I stumbled across the remains of a campsite that wasn't on any map, it immediately put me on edge. Strange. I muttered, looking at the remains of what seemed like a small campfire. Next to it were scattered items. A granola bar half-eaten, an empty water bottle, a couple of crumpled candy wrappers. Nothing too out of the ordinary for a hiker, right? But the missing tent or any other gear, that was super weird. It was like whoever had been there was in a serious rush to leave. Emily stood next to me, arms crossed, eyes narrowed as she scanned the woods around us. "You think someone's lost?" she asked, her voice low, like talking too loudly might disturb something in the quiet. "I don't know," I replied, still eyeing the camp. "But they left in a hurry, that's for sure." We'd been planning to set up our own camp a little further down the trail, but seeing this abandoned place just made me uneasy. Something about it didn't feel right. The trail wasn't exactly packed this time of year, and the chances of running into someone exactly at this spot fell off. "Maybe we should keep going," Emily suggested. "Find another place to set up." I wanted to agree, but something about that camp just gnawed at me. Maybe it was the eerie quiet, or the way the forest just felt heavier, like the trees were watching us. "Yeah," I finally said, pulling my gaze away from the dead fire. "Let's move on." We packed up fast, hiking in silence for a while. The usual trail sounds, our boots crunching on dirt, the birds overhead, did little to calm the tension hanging between us. We both kept looking over our shoulders way more often than we should have. Each time I looked back, I half expected to see someone, some stranger, just walk out of the trees towards us without a sound. But there was nothing, just the quiet woods. After another hour, the sun started to sink lower, casting really long shadows over the trail. We needed to find a place to camp soon, but that uneasy feeling from the abandoned site just stayed with us. Every little sound seemed sharper, every movement in the trees more noticeable. When we finally found a flat clearing big enough for our tent, we didn't waste any time. We set up quickly. The routine of pitching the tent and gathering firewood calming us down a bit. Emily didn't say much, but I could tell she was still thinking about the other camp. So was I. That night, the fire we built felt more like a shield than just a source of warmth. The circle of light it cast seemed fragile, barely holding back the thick, heavy darkness of the woods. The silence was different now, less peaceful, more oppressive. Even the wind seemed to have died down, leaving everything still, too still. "Do you think they'll come back?" Emily asked suddenly, breaking the quiet. I looked up from the fire. "Who?" "The people from the other campsite." The question caught me off guard. I hadn't really thought about it like that. I just assumed they were gone, maybe lost, maybe they'd abandoned the trail. But her words stuck with me, because the truth was, we had no idea why they left. I shook my head. I doubt it. Maybe they were spooked by something. Animals, maybe? I said it, but I didn't believe it, and I don't think she did either. The night just dragged on, the fire slowly burning down to glowing embers. Emily had gone into the tent, but I stayed by the fire, staring into the woods. My nerves were totally frayed, my mind racing with every tiny sound. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps just beyond the tree line, soft, deliberate. I froze, straining to listen, but the sound was gone as quickly as it had come. Probably just my imagination, I told myself. The woods play tricks on you when you're tired. But even as I tried to convince myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was out there. Sometime after midnight, I finally gave in and crawled into the tent. Emily was already asleep, her breathing slow and steady. I lay down beside her, listening to the quiet, the crackle of the last embers of the fire outside. Just as I was starting to drift off, I heard it. Footsteps, not far off, not vague, right outside the tent. My eyes snapped open, heart pounding in my chest. For a moment, I thought maybe it was an animal, a deer or something passing through. But no, these footsteps were too deliberate, too human. They circled the tent, slow, methodical. I could hear the soft crunch of leaves and twigs underfoot, the faint rustle of something or someone moving just beyond the thin fabric of the tent. My mouth went dry. I held my breath, trying not to move, trying not to make a sound. Emily stirred beside me, half asleep. "Jared," she whispered, her voice thick with drowsiness. "What's that?" "Shoo!" I whispered back, barely audible, "Someone's out there." Her eyes snapped open, and I could feel her body tense beside me. We both just lay there, frozen, listening. The footsteps stopped. For a few moments, there was nothing, just silence. I thought maybe whoever was had gone, that maybe we were safe. But then I heard something worse than the footsteps. Breathing. It was faint but unmistakable, heavy, deliberate breathing, just outside the tent. Whoever was, they were standing right there, inches from us. My heart was racing so fast, I thought it might give me away. Emily reached for my hand, squeezing it tight. I squeezed back, trying to keep her calm, try to keep myself calm. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, listening to that slow, steady breathing. My mind raced, trying to come up with an explanation, trying to figure out what to do. But there was no explanation, and there was nothing we could do. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the breathing stopped. We waited, not daring to move. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. But there were no more footsteps, no more sounds. Whoever or whatever it was, they were gone. Finally, I exhaled, my body trembling with the release of tension. Emily sat up slowly, her face pale in the faint light. "What the hell was that?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer. I just shook my head, feeling more rattled than I'd ever been in my life. We didn't sleep for the rest of the night. We just sat there listening, waiting, our nerves shot. When dawn finally broke, we packed up our camp in record time, neither of us saying much. The only thing we agreed on was that we needed to get out of there, and fast. As we hiked back toward civilization, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every rustle in the trees, every shadow made me flinch. Emily kept glancing back over her shoulder, her face tight with anxiety. When we finally reached a more populated area of the trail, we both breathed a sigh of relief. But even now, weeks later, I still think about that night. I think about the footsteps, the breathing, the abandoned campsite. And I wonder if whoever was out there that night is still out there, waiting for the next hikers to stumble into their path. You know, the open road can be a lonely place, but I never thought it could actually swallow a guy whole. Not until my buddy Mike just vanished into thin air on Route 50, leaving nothing behind but his truck idling and a mystery that still messes with my head to this day. I'm Tom, a long-haul trucker, just like Mike was. We've been friends for years, shooting the breeze over our crackling CB radios and nursing cups of truck stop coffee. Mike was the most reliable guy you could imagine. Always on time, always where he said he'd be, until that night in late October, when he just wasn't. It started out like any other run. Mike was taking a load of electronics from Sacramento to Denver, a route he'd driven 1,000,000 times before. We chatted earlier that day, making plans to meet up in Denver for a beer once he got in. Should be there by tomorrow afternoon. Tommy boy, he'd said, his deep laugh rumbling through the speaker. Don't you dare start without me. Those were the last words I'd ever hear from him. The next day, I rolled into Denver and waited at our usual spot. Hours went by, but no sign of Mike. No call, no message. That was so not like him. Worry started to chew at my gut as I tried his cell phone again and again, straight to voicemail every single time. I called his dispatcher, but they hadn't heard from him either. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. The police got involved, but there wasn't much to go on at first. Mike's last known spot was a gas station just outside of Ely, Nevada. The security footage showed him filling up his rig, grabbing a coffee and heading back out on the road. Just another trucker on just another night. But he never made it to his next check-in point. Somewhere between Ely and the Utah border, Mike and his truck had just vanished into the desert night. I couldn't just sit around waiting for news. I told my boss I needed some time off and hit the road, literally retracing Mike's route. The Nevada desert is a real lonely place, miles and miles of empty highways stretching out to the horizon. As I drove, I couldn't help but picture Mike out there somewhere, in trouble and needing help. 3 days into my search, I got the call. They'd found Mike's truck. It was abandoned on a remote stretch of Highway 50, about 100 miles east of Ely. My heart raced as I sped to the location, not knowing what I was going to find. The scene was eerie. Mike's big blue Peterbilt was just sitting there on the side of the road, engine idling, lights on, like he'd just stepped out for a second. But there was no sign of Mike anywhere. The police were already there when I arrived, combing the area for clues. They let me take a look inside the cab, hoping I might notice something out of place. Everything seemed normal. Mike's logbook was open on the passenger seat. His favorite cap was hanging from the rear view mirror. His phone was still plugged into the charger. We found fresh tire tracks leading off the road. One of the officers told me, "Looks like another vehicle pulled up alongside the truck." But the tracks disappear after about 50 yards. It's like they just vanished. The next few days were a blur of search parties and interviews. Mike's family flew in, their faces etched with worry and fear. We searched every inch of that desert but found nothing. No signs of a struggle, no blood, no body. Just miles and miles of empty sand and scrub. As days turned into weeks, hope started to fade. The police investigation stalled, with no new leads to follow. Mike's family went back home, leaving behind flyers with his picture plastered all over Ely and the towns around it. But I just couldn't let it go. I took an extended leave from work, rented a small apartment in Ely, and dedicated myself to finding Mike. I talked to every trucker who came through town, showed his picture in every diner and gas station along Route 50. Someone had to have seen something. It was about a month after Mike's disappearance when things took a really strange turn. I was at a truck stop outside of Ely when my phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello." I answered. For a moment, there was nothing but static. Then, faintly, I heard a voice. "Tom? Tom, is that you?" My blood ran cold. It was Mike's voice. "Mike! Mike, where are you? Are you okay?" But the only response was more static, and then the call just cut off. I tried calling back, but it went straight to an automated message saying the number was no longer in service. I reported the call to the police, but they couldn't trace it. Over the next few weeks, similar calls came in to me, to Mike's family, even to his old dispatcher. Always Mike's voice, always barely audible, always cutting off after a few seconds. The calls reignited the investigation, but they also just made the mystery even deeper. Where was Mike calling from? Why couldn't he tell us where he was? And how the heck was he making these calls when his phone was still in his abandoned truck? As winter set in, making the desert nights bitter cold, I found myself driving Route 50 more and more. I'd cruise along at night, headlights cutting through the darkness, hoping to spot something, anything that might lead me to Mike. It was on one of these night drives, about 3 months after Mike vanished, that it happened. I was about 50 miles east of where we'd found his truck, when my headlights caught something reflective in the scrub off the side of the road. I pulled over and got out, my flashlight beam dancing across the desert floor. And there it was, a trucker's logbook, its metal spiral binding glinting in the light. My hand shook as I picked it up and opened it. It was Mike's. The last entry was dated the night he disappeared. But there was something else. A series of numbers scrolled hastily on the last page. Coordinates. Heart pounding. I punched the numbers into my GPS. They led to a spot about 20 miles south of the highway, deep in the desert. I called the police immediately, and by dawn, a search team was assembled. We set out across the rugged terrain, hope and fear warring in my chest. What would we find? After hours of searching, we found it. An old abandoned mine shaft, its entrance half hidden by years of shifting sand. And there, propped against a rusty piece of mining equipment, was Mike's trucker hat. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Search and rescue teams were called in. The area was blocked off as they prepared to explore the mine shaft. I stood there, staring at Mike's hat in my hands, a million questions racing through my mind. Was Mike down there? Was he still alive? And if he was, How had he survived for 3 months in an abandoned mine? As the rescue team disappeared into the darkness of the mine shaft, I found myself holding my breath. Whatever we were about to discover, I knew one thing for certain. The mystery of Mike's disappearance was far from over. The desert wind whistled around us, carried with it the faint echo of a voice. Mike's voice? Or just my imagination, fueled by months of searching and hoping? Only time would tell. But as I stood there, Mike's hat clutched in my hands and my eyes fixed on the dark mouth of mine, I made a silent promise. Whatever happened, whatever we found down there, I wouldn't stop until I uncovered the truth. Because out there in that vast, unforgiving desert, my friend had vanished, and I was determined to bring him home, one way or another. It was just supposed to be a quiet hike, a way to clear my head. But the second I saw that figure on the hill, everything just changed. The Appalachian Trail, which usually felt like my safe, calm place, suddenly felt threatening, like the trees had secrets they weren't ready to share. I'd set out early that morning, the sun just starting to poke over the horizon, casting a soft glow over the trail. The air was cool and crisp, and the path ahead wound through really dense forest, promising miles of nothing but nature. I'd been hiking for about 4 hours when I saw it, or rather, saw them, up ahead, perched on a ridge that looked down on a steep drop, was a figure, a person. They were standing unbelievably still, facing me, or at least that's what I thought from that distance. It was hard to tell. They hadn't been there before. I was absolutely sure of it. The ridge had been empty just a few minutes earlier when I glanced up to admire the view. I stopped walking, squinting up the trail, trying to make out any details. I wasn't close enough to see their face, just the outline of a body, tall, a little hunched, and so still. So still that for a moment, I actually wondered if I was imagining them. I lifted a hand, giving a casual wave, figuring it was just another hiker, maybe taking a rest and enjoying the view, but the figure didn't move. They didn't wave back. They didn't even shift their weight. They just stood there, watching, or at least that's how it felt. A weird feeling started crawling up my spine, but I shook it off. People get quirky out here sometimes, you know? I'd met my share of loners on the trail, folks who just didn't want to chat or interact. Maybe this was one of them. So I decided to just keep moving, figuring I'd pass them soon enough. But as I walked, I kept glancing up at the ridge. The figure never moved, never shifted. The closer I got, the more unsettling it became. I couldn't make out any facial features, just that dark outline against the sky. But the longer I looked, the more something about their posture seemed wrong. It was too stiff, too deliberate, like they were waiting for me. I tried to brush off the growing unease. I'm not easily spooked, and there was no real reason to be afraid of someone just standing there. Still, I sped up my pace, eager to close the distance between us, or maybe even get ahead of them. But when I finally reached the spot where they should have been, they were gone. I stopped, looking around completely confused. The ridge wasn't that high, and there wasn't much tree cover. There was no way they could have just disappeared without me seeing them leave. I scanned the whole area around me, my eyes darting between the trees, looking for any sign of movement. Nothing. That eerie feeling was back, even stronger now. I wasn't alone out here, but whoever was out there with me was playing some kind of twisted game. I told myself to just keep moving, not to let it bother me. The trail was long, and I had hours to go before setting up camp for the night. I figured I'd probably run into them again further down the path. But as I walked, my thoughts just kept going back to that figure. I hadn't seen their face, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they'd been watching me, tracking my every step. About an hour later, I came to a small clearing where the trees opened up and the trail cut through a field of tall grass. The sky was still a perfect blue, the sun warm on my skin. I tried to focus on how beautiful it was, but I just couldn't. The figure on the ridge was still in the back of my mind, like a splinter I couldn't get rid of, and then there they were again, Far ahead, at the edge of the clearing where the trail curved back into the trees, I saw them, the same figure, the same unnerving stillness. This time they were closer, and I could see more details. A dark jacket, hiking boots, maybe a hat, but still no movement, no indication that they saw me. Or maybe they did, and that was the whole problem. They wanted me to see them. I stopped dead in my tracks. My breath caught in my throat, and my heart raced in my chest. I wasn't sure if I should call out to them, or just turn around and head back the way I came. The rational part of my brain told me they were just another hiker, someone who probably didn't want to be bothered. But deep down, I knew something was really off. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. "Hey!" I called out, my voice carrying over the field. "You all right?" No response. No movement. I waited, hoping for some acknowledgement. Anything that would make this tension building inside me ease up, but they just stood there like a statue, unmoving, unspeaking. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't just stand there forever, waiting for them to make a move. So with a deep breath, I started walking again. But this time, I kept my eyes on them, watching for the slightest twitch, the smallest shift. And as I got closer, I realized something strange. The figure wasn't looking at me. They were looking just past me. I couldn't explain why, but the thought sent a cold shiver down my spine. I stopped again, my pulse pounding in my ears. Slowly, I turned to glance over my shoulder, scanning the trees and the trail behind me. There was no one there. I turned back to the figure, but they were gone again. Panic started to creep in around the edges of my mind. This wasn't normal. People don't just vanish like that. My first instinct was to call someone, but I had zero service out here. I was totally on my own, deep in the woods, with no way to contact anyone. I was too far from the last shelter to turn back, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever or whatever was out there wasn't done with me yet. I kept walking, faster now, my footsteps echoing in the quiet. The trail twisted through the woods, the trees closing in on either side. Every time I rounded a corner, I expected to see the figure again, standing in the middle of the path, just waiting for me. But the trail was empty, at least for now. By the time I reached the next ridge, the sun was starting to dip lower in the sky. Long shadows stretched across the ground, and the air had grown colder. I needed to find a place to camp soon, but I couldn't shake the feeling that stopping would be a mistake. I kept glancing behind me, half expecting to see the figure lurking in the trees. My heart raced with every step, and my mind was spinning with 1,000 possibilities. Who was this person? Why were they following me? Or was I just imagining the whole thing? Just as the trail curved again, I saw a movement out of the corner of my eye. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. Slowly, I turned my head. There, standing just off the trail, partly hidden by the trees, was the figure. Closer this time, watching. I stared at them, my hands trembling at my sides. They didn't move. They didn't speak. They just watched me, their face hidden by shadows. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and ran. I didn't care about the trail. Didn't care where I was going. I just needed to get away from them. My feet pounded the ground, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I pushed through the trees, branches slapping at my arms and face. I didn't look back. I just couldn't. By the time I finally stopped, my legs were burning, and my chest felt like it could explode. I leaned against a tree, gasping for air, my heart racing. The trail was nowhere in sight, and I realized I had just run off into the woods, totally losing my way. The figure was gone, but the fear wasn't. I stayed there for a while, trying to calm down, try to convince myself that it was over, that they were gone for good. But deep down, I knew the truth. They were still out there, waiting, and somehow, I knew I wouldn't be alone on this trail again. One minute she was right there, laughing with her friends as we hiked through the thick forest. The next, Lisa was just gone, vanished into thin air. leaving behind nothing but a deafening silence and a mystery that would haunt our small town for years. My name is Emma, and I was actually there the day Lisa disappeared. We were on a school trip to Blackwood National Park, this huge wilderness area just outside our hometown. It was supposed to be a fun day out, a chance to learn about nature and escape the boring routine of the classroom. Instead, it became the day that changed absolutely everything. There were 20 of us students, plus our biology teacher, Mr. Thompson. We'd been hiking for about an hour, the spring air feeling so crisp and smelling strongly of pine. Lisa was right next to me, her long brown hair bouncing in a ponytail as she chatted super excitedly about the college application she just sent out. I really hope I get into state, she was saying, her eyes bright with excitement. Their marine biology program is amazing. I remember about to reply when Mr. Thompson called for our attention. We'd reached a small clearing, and he wanted to talk about the local plants. Lisa and I kind of hung back a bit. At the edge of the group, that's when it happened. I turned to whisper something to Lisa. I don't even remember what was now, but she wasn't there. I blinked, totally confused. She had been right next to me just seconds ago. I looked all around, thinking maybe she just stepped behind a tree or moved forward to hear Mr. Thompson better. But Lisa was nowhere to be seen. At first, I didn't panic. I figured she must have just wandered off, maybe to look at a cool plant or take a picture. But as the minutes ticked by and she didn't come back, a cold dread started to creep over me. Mr. Thompson. I finally called out, my voice shaking a little bit. I can't find Lisa. Those words set off this whole chain of events that would take over our lives for months. The easy chatter of the group turned into worried whispers, then frantic shouts of Lisa's name. Mr. Thompson organized us into search parties, his face pale, but his voice steady as he gave instructions. We combed the area for hours, calling Lisa's name until our voices were raw. The forest that had seemed so peaceful that morning now felt heavy and oppressive, its shadows hiding who knew what dangers. As the sun started to set, casting long, eerie shadows through the trees, the park rangers arrived, followed closely by the police. They asked us all the same questions over and over. When had we last seen Lisa? What was she wearing? Had she seemed upset or mentioned going off on her own? But our answers were always frustratingly the same. One minute she was there, the next she wasn't. It was like the forest had just swallowed her whole. The next few days just flew by in a blur of search parties, news reporters, and hushed conversations. Our small town had never seen anything like this. Lisa's face was plastered on every telephone pole, her smile beaming out from missing person posters that seemed to pop up overnight. As Lisa's best friend, I found myself right in the middle of it all. Police officers and reporters both seemed to think I had to know something, must have some insight into where she might have gone. But I was just as baffled as everyone else. Lisa and I shared everything. If she'd been planning to run away or was in some kind of trouble, I would have known. A week after Lisa's disappearance, they found her notebook. A group of volunteers discovered it in a small cave about a mile from where we'd last seen her. My heart leaped when I heard the news. Finally a clue, but the notebook only made the mystery deeper. The pages were filled with Lisa's neat handwriting, detailing all the plants and animals we'd seen on our hike. The last entry, though, was different. It was a hastily scrolled note that simply read, "I hear it. It's calling me. I have to go." What was it? What had Lisa heard? The questions just multiplied, but answers remained nowhere to be found. As weeks turned into months, the searches happened less often, and the news reports became fewer and further between. Life in our town tried to go back to normal, but there was this heavy feeling that hung over everything. In the hallways at school, Lisa's locker stood as a silent memorial, covered in photos and notes from friends. I couldn't let it go, though. Every weekend, I would go back to the park, hiking the same trails we'd taken that day, searching for, I don't know what, a sign, a clue, anything that might tell us what had happened to Lisa. It was on one of these solo hikes, almost 6 months after Lisa's disappearance, that I found it. I had gone further into the park than usual, pushing deeper into the forest than the official search parties had dared. As I clambered over a fallen log, something caught my eye, a flash of color against the brown forest floor. My heart pounding, I bent down to look closer. It was a bracelet, half buried in the leaves and dirt. With trembling hands, I picked it up, brushing off the grime. It was a friendship bracelet I had made for Lisa on her last birthday, the one she had been wearing the day she disappeared. I looked around wildly, half expecting to see Lisa just step out from behind a tree, but the forest stayed silent, totally indifferent to my discovery. With shaking hands, I took out my phone to call the police, but there was no signal this deep in the woods. As I turned to head back to report what I'd found, I heard something that made me freeze. It was faint, barely audible over the rustle of leaves in the breeze, but was there, a whisper calling my name, Emma? I spun around, my heart racing. Lisa? I called out, my voice echoing through the trees. Lisa, is that you? But there was no response, just the quiet sound of the forest. I stood there for what felt like hours, straining my ears for any sound, any sign of my lost friend. But whatever I had heard, if I had heard anything at all, didn't come again. When I finally made it back and reported my discovery to the police, it jump-started the investigation again. Search parties once again combed the area where I had found the bracelet. But like every lead before, it ultimately went nowhere. The forest kept its secrets, and Lisa remained missing. Now, as I sit here writing this, a year after Lisa vanished, I'm still no closer to understanding what happened that day in Blackwood National Park. The questions still swirl in my mind, keeping me awake at night. Where did Lisa go? What did she hear that made her write that cryptic note? And was it really her voice I heard in the forest that day, or just my desperate imagination? Our town has changed since that school trip. We've lost our innocence, our sense of safety. Parents hold their children a little tighter, and no one goes into the woods alone anymore. But I haven't given up hope. Every time I look at the trees on the edge of town, I think of Lisa. I imagine her out there somewhere, maybe lost, maybe hiding, but alive. And I make a silent promise, the same one I made every day since she disappeared. I will find you, Lisa. Whatever it takes, I'll uncover the truth. Because in the end, that's all we have left. The hope that someday, somehow, we'll understand what happened on that spring day when the forest took my best friend. Until then, the mystery of Lisa's disappearance remains a shadow hanging over our town, a reminder that sometimes people can vanish without a trace, leaving behind nothing but questions and a lingering sense of unfinished business. The moment we stepped into that abandoned cabin, I knew we'd made a terrible mistake. The air inside was thick with the scent of recent habitation, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I realized we weren't alone in these woods. My name is Mike, and what was supposed to be a fun camping trip with friends turned into a night of sheer terror that still haunts me to this day. It all started innocently enough. My buddies Tom, Alex, and I had been planning this trip for months. We were all desperate to escape the grind of our corporate jobs, if only for a weekend. The Blackwater National Forest seemed like the perfect getaway. Miles of pristine wilderness, far from the reaches of self-service and email notifications. We arrived at the trailhead late Friday afternoon, the sun already dipping low behind the towering pines. The plan was to hike a few miles in and set up camp near one of the small mountain lakes scattered throughout the area. As we shouldered our packs and set off down the trail, I felt the stress of the work week begin to melt away. The hike was invigorating, the crisp autumn air filling our lungs as we climbed steadily higher into mountains. We joked and swapped stories, our laughter echoing through the trees. It felt good to be out here, away from the constant noise and pressure of the city. As the daylight began to fade, we started looking for a suitable campsite. That's when Alex spotted it. A small cabin nestled in a clearing just off the main trail. It wasn't marked on any of our maps, which should have been our first warning sign. Hey guys, check it out. Alex called, already veering off the path towards the structure. Tom and I exchanged glances. I don't know, man, I said hesitantly. We should probably stick to the trail. But Alex was already halfway to the cabin, his curiosity getting the better of him. With a sigh, we followed, not wanting to split up as darkness approached. The cabin looked old, but surprisingly well maintained. No broken windows or sagging roof. Just a simple, solid structure that seemed out of place in the wilderness. As we drew closer, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "Hello?" Alex called out, knocking on the wooden door. "Anyone home?" Silence greeted us, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the light breeze. After a moment, Alex tried the door handle. To our surprise, it swung open easily. "We shouldn't go in," I protested, but my words fell on deaf ears as my friends eagerly crossed the threshold. The interior of the cabin was sparse but tidy. A small kitchenette occupied one corner, with a wooden table and chairs in the center of the main room. A stone fireplace dominated the far wall, and a narrow staircase led to what I assumed was a loft bedroom. "This is perfect," Tom exclaimed, dropping his pack on the floor. "And we can spend the night here instead of setting up tents." I opened my mouth to object, but the words died in my throat as I noticed something odd. There was a half-empty glass of water on the table, and the ashes in the fireplace still glowed faintly with embers. "Guys," I said slowly, "I think someone's been here recently. Very recently." Alex shrugged off my concerns. "Probably just some other hikers who left this morning. Come on, Mike, lighten up. This is way better than sleeping on the ground." Against my better judgment, I relented. We unpacked our gear and settled in for the night, cooking dinner on our portable stoves and sharing stories around the rekindled fire. As the warmth and camaraderie worked their magic, I began to relax. Maybe I had been overreacting earlier. We turned in early, exhausted from the day's hike. Tom and Alex claimed the loft, while I set up my sleeping bag near the fireplace. Despite my earlier misgivings, I fell asleep quickly, lulled by the crackling flames and the soft sound of wind in the trees outside. I'm not sure how long I slept before the noise woke me. At first, I thought it was just the wind or maybe an animal outside. But as I lay there in the darkness, I realized it was something else entirely. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, circling the cabin. My heart began to race as I strained my ears, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. But the sound was unmistakable. Someone was out there, moving with purpose around the perimeter of the cabin. I sat up slowly, my eyes struggling to penetrate the gloom. The fire had died down to embers, casting eerie shadows across the room. "Alex," I whispered urgently. "Tom, wake up." There was no response from the loft. The footsteps continued their measured pace outside, and now I could hear something else. A soft scraping sound, as if someone was dragging something along the outer walls of the cabin. Panic rising in my throat, I scrambled to my feet and moved toward the stairs. "Tom? Alex?" I hissed louder this time. Still nothing. Just as I reached the bottom of the staircase, the footsteps outside came to an abrupt halt. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, a new sound filled the air, the slow, rhythmic creaking of someone climbing the steps to the cabin's front porch. My blood ran cold as I saw the door handle begin to turn. Without thinking, I lunged forward and threw the deadbolt, my hand shaking so badly I could barely manage it. The handle jiggled once, twice, and then stopped. Another beat of silence followed, broken by a sound that chilled me to my core, a low, guttural chuckle from just on the other side of the door. "Guys!" I shouted, abandoning all pretense of quiet. "Wake up, now!" I heard movement from the loft, followed by Tom's groggy voice. "What's going on?" Before I could answer, a thunderous crash shook the cabin as something heavy slammed into the door. The wood groaned, but held. Another impact followed, and I could see the frame starting to splinter. Someone's trying to break in. I yelled, backing away from the door. "We need to get out of here." Tom and Alex scrambled down from the loft, confusion turning to fear as they took in the situation. The pounding on the door continued, growing more frenzied with each passing second. "The window," Alex shouted, pointing to a small opening on the far side of the cabin. It would be a tight squeeze, but it was our only chance. We raced to gather our essential gear, the sound of splintering wood spurring us on. Just as we reached the window, the door finally gave way with a sickening crack. I turned, dreading what I might see, but the doorway remained empty. Only darkness greeted us, along with the soft sound of footsteps entering the cabin. "Go, go," I urged, helping Alex through the window before practically shoving Tom after him. I could hear the intruder moving to the cabin now, slow and deliberate, savoring the hunt. I had one leg through the window when a hand closed around my ankle. I kicked blindly, connecting with something solid, and heard a grunt of pain. The grip loosened just enough for me to wrench free and tumble out into the night. We ran through the dark forest, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us with every step. I could hear pursuit behind us, crashing through the underbrush, far too fast to be human. We burst onto the main trail, our lungs burning as we sprinted downhill toward the distant trailhead. The sounds of pursuit faded, but we didn't slow our pace until we reached the parking lot and the safety of our car. As we sped away from the forest, the adrenaline began to wear off, leaving us shaken and confused. What had we stumbled into? Who or what had been in that cabin? We reported the incident to the park rangers, but they seemed skeptical of our story. A search of the area revealed no trace of the cabin or any signs of disturbance. It was as if the entire night had been a shared hallucination. But I know what we experienced was real. Sometimes late at night, I can still hear those footsteps circling, that chilling laugh on the other side of the door. And I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't escaped. What was waiting for us in that cabin in the woods? One thing's for certain, I'll never go camping again without thoroughly researching the area. And if I ever come across another abandoned cabin in the wilderness, I'll keep on walking, no matter how inviting it might seem. Because sometimes the most dangerous things are the ones that look safe on the surface. The whir of the drone's propellers cut through the stillness of the forest, a mechanical intruder in my solitary retreat. As night fell and the sound grew closer, I realized with mounting dread that I wasn't just being watched, I was being hunted. My name is Emily, and what began as a soul-searching solo camping trip turned into a nightmare that still keeps me up at night. I'd always been an outdoors enthusiast, finding solace in nature when life became too overwhelming. After a particularly brutal breakup and the stress of a high-pressure job, I decided to take a week off and venture into the Adirondack Mountains. Just me, my tent, and the great outdoors. Or so I thought. The first 2 days were exactly what I needed. I hiked deep into the wilderness, far from the popular trails and campsites. The solitude was therapeutic, allowing me to clear my head and regain some perspective. By the third day, I had found the perfect spot to set up camp. A small clearing near a bubbling stream, surrounded by towering pines. As I was gathering firewood that afternoon, I heard it for the first time, a faint buzzing sound like an oversized insect. I looked up, scanning the sky, and that's when I saw it, a drone, sleek and black, hovering high above the tree line. It was so out of place in this pristine wilderness that for a moment, I thought I must be imagining things. But as I watched, the drone descended lower, its camera clearly visible and pointed directly at me. A chill ran down my spine. Who was piloting this thing, and why were they so interested in my campsite? I waved my arms, shouting at the unseen operator, "Hey, this is private. Go away." My voice echoed through the trees, but the drone remained hovering, its lens fixed on my position. After a few minutes, it ascended and flew off, disappearing over the treetops. I stood there, heart pounding, try and make sense of what had just happened. Maybe it was just some photography enthusiast getting aerial shots of the forest. But deep down, a nagging voice told me this was something more sinister. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling as I went about setting up camp, but I couldn't help glancing up at the sky every few minutes. The drone didn't reappear, and as the sun began to set, I started to convince myself that I had overreacted. I was out here to relax. After all, no need to let paranoia ruin my trip. As night fell, I sat by my small campfire, losing myself in the flickering flames and the chorus of crickets and night birds. The peace of the forest began to work its magic, and I felt the tension in my shoulders start to ease. That's when I heard it again. The faint whir of propellers, barely audible over crackling fire. I froze, straining my ears. It was definitely getting closer. I doused the fire and retreated to my tent, zipping it shut as if the thin fabric could offer any real protection. Through the mesh window, I peered out into the darkness. At first, I saw nothing but the faint outlines of trees in the moonlight. Then, a pinprick of red light appeared between the branches, moving with purpose. The drone emerged into the clearing, much closer to the ground this time. In the dim moonlight, I could see it was larger than I had first thought, easily the size of a large pizza box. It hovered near my extinguished fire pit, rotating slowly as it surveyed the area. My breath caught in my throat as the drone's camera swiveled towards my tent. The red light blinked twice, and I heard the unmistakable sound of a photo being taken. This was no innocent photography project. Someone was deliberately targeting me. For what felt like hours, the drone circled my campsite, occasionally pausing to take more photos or zoom in on specific areas. I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, afraid that any movement would draw more attention. Questions raced through my mind. Who was behind this? What did they want? And most pressingly, were they nearby, watching in person as well as through the drone's camera? Finally, just as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, the drone ascended and disappeared once more. I waited another hour before cautiously emerging from my tent, half expecting to find someone lurking in the shadows. But the clearing was empty, peaceful in the early morning light. If it weren't for the churning in my stomach and the lingering sound of propellers in my ears, I might have convinced myself it had all been a bizarre dream. I knew I should pack up and hike out immediately, but a mix of stubborn pride and misplaced optimism kept me there. This was my vacation, my time to reconnect with nature. I wasn't going to let some creep with a drone chase me away. The day passed uneventfully. I went for a long hike, swam in a nearby lake, and tried to lose myself in the beauty of my surroundings. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every snapping twig or rustle of leaves had me spinning around, searching for hidden observers. As night fell once again, my nerves were frayed to the breaking point. I didn't bother with a fire, not wanting to draw attention to my location. Instead, I retreated to my tent early, using my headlamp to read a book I'd brought along. But I couldn't focus on the words, my ears straining for any hint of the drone's return. It was just past midnight when I heard it, the now familiar hum. So faint at first, I thought I might be imagining it. But it grew steadily louder, and this time, it was accompanied by something else. The sound of footsteps crunching through the underbrush. My blood ran cold. The drone pilot was here, in person, closing in on my camp. I switched off my headlamp and lay perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. The footsteps grew closer, slow and deliberate. They paused just outside my tent, and I could see a shadow looming against the fabric. For a long, terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then a hand pressed against the side of the tent, slowly running along the length of it. I bit back a scream, my whole body trembling. Suddenly, my tent was bathed in bright light. The drone had arrived, its powerful LEDs illuminating the entire clearing. Through the thin walls of the tent, I could clearly see the silhouette of a person standing just feet away from me. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I burst out of my sleeping bag and to the far side of the tent, ripping through the fabric in my desperation to escape. I heard a shout behind me as I plunged into the dark forest, running blindly through the trees. Branches whipped at my face and roots threatened to trip me, but I didn't slow down. I could hear pursuit behind me, the drone buzzing overhead and heavy footsteps crashing through the undergrowth. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but terror pushed me onward. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. Eventually, the sound of pursuit faded, but I kept going, fueled by adrenaline and fear. It wasn't until I stumbled and fell hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me, that I finally stopped. I lay there on the forest floor, gasping for breath, straining my ears for any sign that I was still being followed. But there was only the normal sounds of the night forest, wind in the trees, the hoot of a distant owl. As the adrenaline wore off, the reality of my situation sank in. I was alone in the wilderness, in the middle of the night, without any gear or supplies. I had no idea where I was or which direction would lead me back to civilization. And somewhere out there, someone with unknown intentions was looking for me. I spent the rest of that night huddled at the base of a large tree, jumping at every sound, convinced that each shadow held a threat. When dawn finally broke, I oriented myself using the rising sun and began the long trek back towards the trailhead. It took me 2 days to find my way out of the forest. 2 days of constant fear, of rationing the few energy bars I had stuffed in my pockets, of startling at every drone-like buzz of insects. When I finally reached my car, I broke down in tears of relief. I reported the incident to the park rangers and local police, but without any concrete evidence. There wasn't much they could do. They suggested it might have been an overzealous wildlife photographer or maybe some kids playing a prank. But I know what I experienced was far more malevolent. To this day, I don't know who was behind the drone or what they wanted. The thought that they might have all my personal information from the photos of my campsite still keeps me up at night. I haven't been camping since, and even the sound of a distant lawnmower is enough to set my heart racing. I used to find solace in the isolation of nature. Now, I know that even in the most remote wilderness, in this age of technology, we're never truly alone. And sometimes, the one watching you from above is anything but benevolent. The morning sun filtered through the pine trees, illuminating our campsite and the horror that awaited us. Every scrap of food, every bottle of water, every supply we brought with us had vanished overnight. And there, carved into the bark of a nearby tree, was a message that made my blood run cold. Leave now or starve. Your choice. My name is Jason, and what should have been a fun family camping trip turned into a desperate fight for survival that still haunts my dreams. It was supposed to be the perfect getaway. My wife, Sarah, our 2 kids, Emily and Max, and I had been planning this trip for months. We'd chosen a remote campsite in the Ozark National Forest, far from the crowded tourist spots. The promise of pristine wilderness, crystal clear streams, and starry nights had us all excited as we set out early Friday morning. The drive was long, but filled with laughter and anticipation. We played road trip games, sang along to our favorite songs, and talked about all the adventures we'd have. As we turned onto the bumpy Forest Service road that led to our campsite, I felt the stress of work and everyday life begin to melt away. We arrived at our designated spot in the late afternoon. It was even more beautiful than the pictures online had shown. A small clearing surrounded by towering pines, with a babbling brook just a short walk away. The kids immediately ran off to explore, while Sarah and I started setting up camp. "This is perfect," Sarah said, smiling as she helped me pitch our family-sized tent. "I think we all needed this." I couldn't have agreed more. The past year had been tough on all of us, with the pressures of work, school, and the general chaos of life taking their toll. This weekend was our chance to reconnect, to remember what really mattered. As the sun began to set, we gathered around the campfire I built. The smell of hot dogs roasting over flames mixed with the earthy scent of the forest. We laughed as we told stories and roasted marshmallows. looking around at my family's happy faces, illuminated by the flickering firelight. I felt a deep sense of contentment. "Dad, can we go hiking tomorrow?" Max asked, his eyes shining with excitement. "Of course, buddy," I replied, ruffling his hair. "We'll explore the whole forest if you want." As the fire died down and the stars came out in full force, we retreated to our tent. The sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl lulled us to sleep. I drifted off with a smile on my face, looking forward to days ahead. The first sign that something was wrong came in the pre-dawn hours. I was jolted awake by a noise outside the tent, something that sounded like footsteps, too heavy to be an animal. I lay still, listening intently, but the sound had stopped. Chalking it up to my imagination, I eventually fell back into a restless sleep. When I next opened my eyes, sunlight was streaming through the tent walls. I stretched, yawned, and unzipped the tent flap, ready to start breakfast for the family. That's when the reality of our situation hit me, like a punch to the gut. Our campsite, which had been neatly organized the night before, was in disarray. The picnic table where we left our cooler and food bins was empty. Our water jugs were gone. Even the backpacks we'd left in the car had disappeared. "Sarah," I called, my voice tight with panic. "Wake up. Something's wrong." As my family emerged from the tent, rubbing sleep from their eyes, I did a quick inventory. Everything, and I mean everything edible or drinkable, was gone. Our clothes and tent remained, but anything that could help us survive in the wilderness had vanished. "Dad, what happened?" Emily asked, her voice small and frightened. Before I could answer, Max let out a yelp. "Look," he cried, pointing to a large pine tree at the edge of our campsite. That's when I saw it. Carved into bark, the letters still oozing sap, was a chilling message. "Leave now or starve. Your choice." Sarah gasped, instinctively pulling the kids close to her. I felt a cold, not a fear form in my stomach. This wasn't a random act of theft. Someone had deliberately taken our supplies, leaving us with an impossible choice. "We need to get out of here," Sarah said, her eyes darting nervously around the clearing. I nodded, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. "Okay, let's pack up quickly and quietly. We'll hike back to the main road and flag down help." As we hurriedly broke down our camp, I tried to piece together what might have happened. Had we unknowingly encroached on someone's territory? Was this the work of some anti-tourist locals? Or was there something more sinister at play? We were almost finished packing when I made another horrifying discovery. Our car keys were missing. Whoever had taken our supplies had ensured we couldn't simply drive away. The reality of our situation began to sink in. We were miles from the nearest town, with no food, no water, and no way to call for help. The forest, which had seemed so welcoming yesterday, now felt oppressive and threatening. "What are we going to do?" Sarah asked, fear evident in her voice. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think rationally. We have two options. We can try to hike out. It's about 15 miles to the main road. Or we can stay here and hope someone comes looking for us when we don't check out on time. But that's days away. Sarah protested. "We can't survive that long without food or water." She was right, of course, but thought of trying to navigate the dense forest with two scared kids and no supplies was equally daunting. As we debated our options, a twig snapped in the forest behind us. We all whirled around, hearts pounding. Was our tormentor watching us, enjoying our fear? "We have to go." I decided. We can't stay here. We shouldered our nearly empty packs and set off down the hiking trail, hoping it would eventually lead us to civilization. I tried to remember everything I'd ever learned about wilderness survival. We could last 3 days without water, longer without food if we paced ourselves. If we stayed on the trail, we had a chance. The first few hours were tough, but manageable. The kids were scared but holding up well, buoyed by the adventure of it all. But as the sun climbed higher and the day grew hotter, our lack of water became a pressing concern. By mid-afternoon, We were all suffering from thirst and fatigue. The kids had stopped talking, conserving their energy. Sarah's face was drawn with worry. I knew we needed to find water soon, or we'd be in serious trouble. Just as I was about to suggest we take a break, Emily spotted something through the trees. "Look," she cried, pointing off the trail. "I think it's a cabin." Sure enough, partially hidden by the forest, stood a small wooden structure. Hope surged through me. Maybe whoever lived there could help us. As we approached, however, that hope turned to confusion and then to fear. The cabin looked abandoned, its windows dark and empty, and there, nailed to the front door, was a piece of paper. My hand shook as I read the typewritten message. "You were warned. This is your last chance. Turn back now." A chill ran down my spine. Whoever was doing this knew exactly where we were and where we were heading. They were toying with us, herding us like cattle. But to what end? "Jason," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "What do we do?" I looked at my family, my wife's frightened eyes, my children's pale faces. We were exhausted, dehydrated, and completely out of our depth. The smart thing would be to turn back, to return to our campsite and hope for rescue. But something in me rebelled against that idea. We hadn't done anything wrong. This was public land, and we had every right to be here. Whoever was behind this sick game didn't own these woods. "We keep going," I said firmly. "We're not letting them win." As we pushed on deeper into the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every shadow between the trees seemed to hide a threat. But we encountered no one, saw no other signs of human presence. Night was falling by the time we finally heard the sound of cars in the distance. We emerged from the forest onto a paved road, exhausted and dehydrated but alive. A passing motorist stopped to help, shocked by our appearance and story. The authorities were called, and a search of the area was conducted, but they found no trace of our missing supplies, no evidence of the threatening messages. Our experience was chalked up to an elaborate prank or the work of some backwoods recluse. But I know what we experienced was real. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still see that message carved into the tree. I can feel the weight of unseen eyes watching us from the forest shadows. We never went camping again after that. The wilderness lost its appeal, tainted by the memory of those terrifying hours. But the experience taught me something valuable. When faced with an impossible choice, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to forge your own path, even when every instinct is screaming at you to turn back. The crunch of leaves under my boots suddenly felt deafening as I crouched behind a rotting log, heart pounding in my chest. Mere feet away, two gruff voices discussed their plans for tomorrow's hunt, but I knew they weren't after deer. As I held my breath, praying they wouldn't discover me, one chilling thought echoed in my mind. I had to get out of these woods alive. My name is Lisa, and what started as a peaceful solo hiking trip turned into a nightmare I'll never forget. I've always been an avid hiker, finding solace in the quiet of nature and the challenge of conquering new trails. This particular weekend, I'd chosen a lesser-known path in the Pisgah National Forest. It was more remote than my usual haunts, but the promise of pristine wilderness and breathtaking views had lured me in. The first day of my hike had been everything I'd hoped for. The autumn air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and decaying leaves. Vibrant reds and golds painted the forest canopy, and the only sounds were my own footsteps and the occasional bird call. As the sun began to set, I found a small clearing perfect for setting up camp. I was just finishing my dinner of dehydrated pasta when I first sensed something was off. A twig snapped in the distance, not unusual in itself, but was followed by what sounded distinctly like a muffled curse. I froze, fork halfway in my mouth, straining my ears. For several long moments, there was only silence. Then, unmistakably, I heard voices. Curiosity warred with caution as I debated investigating. On one hand, It could just be fellow hikers setting up camp nearby. On the other, something about the tone of those voices set me on edge. In the end, curiosity won out. I doused my small campfire and moved quietly in the direction of sounds. As I drew closer, ducking behind trees and trying to step as silently as possible, the voices became clearer. Two men, their gruff tones laced with an undercurrent of excitement that made my skin crawl. Should be easy pickings. One was saying, they never expected out here, just like last time. The other agreed with a chuckle that sent shivers down my spine. Load him up, get him across the border before anyone's the wiser. My blood ran cold as the implications of their conversation sank in. This wasn't about poaching animals. They were talking about people. Human trafficking. Right here, in the supposed safety of a national forest. I must have made some small noise of shock, because suddenly both voices fell silent. My heart leapt into my throat as I heard the crunch of leaves. Footsteps coming in my direction. Panic threatened to overwhelm me. But years of outdoor experience kicked in. I spotted a massive fallen log a few yards away and made for it, moving as quickly and quietly as I could. I had just managed to crouch behind it when the beam of a flashlight cut through the growing darkness. "You hear that?" one of the men asked, his voice much closer now. "Probably just a deer," his companion replied, but he didn't sound convinced. I held my breath, pressing myself as close to the decaying wood as possible. The flashlight beam swept back and forth, coming terrifyingly close to my hiding spot. I could hear them moving around, searching, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they found me. Just when I thought my lungs would burst from holding my breath, a distant howl echoed through the forest. The men's attention snapped towards the sound. "Damn wolves," one muttered. "Let's head back. We've got an early start tomorrow." I remained frozen in place long after their footsteps had faded away, afraid to even twitch a muscle. When I finally dared to move, my limbs were stiff and trembling from a mixture of cold and fear. My mind raced as I tried to process what I'd overheard. These men were planning to abduct people, possibly hikers like myself, and smuggle them out of the country. And they were doing it tomorrow. I had to do something. Had to stop them somehow. But how? I was miles from the nearest town, with no cell service to call for help. Even if I started hiking out right now in the dark, I'd never make it in time to alert the authorities before these criminals put their plan into action. As the full moon rose over the treetops, casting eerie shadows across the forest floor, I made my decision. I couldn't leave. Couldn't risk other innocent people falling victim to these monsters. I had to stay, to gather evidence, to find a way to stop them. Moving with a caution born of fear, I crept back towards my campsite. I quickly packed up my gear, leaving no trace that I'd ever been there. Then, steeling my nerves, I began to make my way in the direction the men had gone. It didn't take long to find their camp. Unlike my small, leave no trace setup, theirs was elaborate. A large tent was erected in a clearing, surrounded by various pieces of equipment I couldn't identify in the darkness. A beaten-up pickup truck was parked nearby, its bed covered by a tarp, gaping into the shadows. I circled their camp, looking for anything I could use as evidence. That's when I spotted it. A small digital camera sitting on a folding table near the tent. If I could get my hands on that, it might contain the proof needed to bring these criminals to justice. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure they'd hear it as I crept closer to the table. The men's snores emanated from inside the tent, but each sound made me flinch. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as I reached for the camera with trembling fingers. Just as my hand closed around it, a blood-curdling scream shattered the night. I nearly dropped the camera in shock, whirling toward the source of the sound. It had come from the direction of the truck. The tent erupted with activity, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness as the men burst out, cursing loudly in their confusion. "Shut her up!" one yelled as they ran towards the truck. Horror washed over me as I realized the implications. They already had a victim. The hunt had started early. In that moment, survival instinct took over. Clutching the camera to my chest, I ran. I ran faster than I ever had in my life. Branches whipping at my face. Roots threatened to trip me with every step. Behind me, I could hear shouting and the sound of pursuit. I don't know how long I ran or in what direction. The forest that seemed so peaceful earlier now felt like a maze designed to trap me. Every shadow held a potential threat. Every sound pursuer closing in. Eventually, my lungs burning and legs trembling, I was forced to stop. I collapsed behind a large boulder, gasping for air and straining my ears for any sign that I'd been followed. But there was only the normal sounds of the night forest. The hoot of an owl, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. As my breathing slowly returned to normal, I fumbled with the camera, praying it contained the evidence I needed. The screen flickered to life, and I had to stifle a gasp. Photo after photo showed young women, bound and terrified, being loaded into vehicles similar to the truck I'd seen. Interspersed were images of the two men, clearly identifiable, along with others I assumed were part of their operation. I now held proof of their crimes, but I was still miles from help, with two dangerous criminals potentially searching for me. As the adrenaline wore off, exhaustion and fear threatened to overwhelm me, but I couldn't give up. Lives were at stake. With shaking hands, I checked my GPS device. To my immense relief, it showed a ranger station about 5 miles to the east. It would be a grueling night hike through difficult terrain, but it was my only chance. As I set off, every sense on higher alert, I thought of the scream I'd heard of the women in those photos. Their faces gave me the strength to push on, to ignore my aching muscles and the growing blisters on my feet. The first light of dawn was just starting to filter through the trees when I finally stumbled into the ranger station's parking lot. I must have looked a fright. Clothes torn, face scratched, wild-eyed with exhaustion and fear. But the startled ranger listened to my breathless explanation and immediately called for backup. What followed was a blur of police interviews, evidence processing, and a massive search operation. They found the men's camp deserted, but the truck was still there, and in its locked cargo area, they discovered 3 terrified young women, bound but alive. In the end, my evidence led to the arrest of not just the 2 men I'd overheard, but an entire human trafficking ring operating in the area. The victims were rescued, and the criminals brought to justice. But even now, months later, I can't shake the memory of that night. The peaceful solitude of the forest, once my refuge, now holds a hint of menace. Every snapping twig makes me flinch. Every shadow potentially concealing a threat. Yet, I don't regret my choice to stay and gather evidence. Those women are alive and free because I took that risk. It's a reminder that even in our darkest moments, when fear threatens to paralyze us, we have the strength to act, to make a difference. I still hike, still seek out the beauty of nature, but now I carry with me not just supplies and a map, but the knowledge that sometimes the most important trails we blaze are the ones that lead us to stand up for others, no matter the personal cost.